Okay, members of council, all the difficulties now have been overcome, and again I apologize for being a few moments late. As I mentioned at the outset, we did have a couple of legal issues that we had to deal with in camera, but we will get underway. So I thank you very much for your attendance. If I could ask you please to stand and join with me in a moment of silent reflection, our national anthem. Again, I thank you very much for that. Members of council, are there any disclosures by any member this evening? Might make mention that we have heard from Councillor Best earlier on today, and he will not be present this evening, but we do have a quorum and we will proceed. Mr. Acting Clerk, I know there's a consolidation of the agendas there, so are there any other announcements or amendments? Mr. Clerk?
No, Your Worship, just on the additional items on the addendum agenda, they are added onto the agenda. The staff recommendation report PD 1219 was amended. Just on bylaw 1419, user fee bylaw has been added, and 1519, repeal of an agreement with ADR Chambers. And bylaw 1719 has been amended to include the minutes from the December 10th council meeting and February 6th open and closed sessions, Your Worship. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know there's individuals in the overflow room downstairs, and I'm not sure in the council portion of the agenda if there's anyone that is down there that may need to address council. We'll have to give them a minute or two to get up here. But Councillor Chandler will be assuming the chair for the Committee of the Whole, and I'm well aware that there will be probably some of those individuals downstairs as well under that portion of the meeting that'll have to come up to address council. So we will proceed. So what happens when you get a bunch of paperwork. Resolution moved by Councillor Melboof, I think, and second by Councillor Zamira, or LA. One of the problems when it's just a signature with no name on there. So, and I stand corrected on that, Mr. Clerk. Can you make any of that out?
Cluett and LE.
Cluett and LE. Okay. Yeah. Normally, members of public and council, usually the name is printed beside it, but it's not in this instance. So, anyway, the motion is be it resolved that consent items numbers 1 to 9 as amended be approved. Is there any one of those items that any member of council wish pulled out and dealt with separately? Councillor Cluett?
Number 4, Your Worship.
Number 4. Any other item that any member wish pulled out and dealt with separately? Councillor Challoner?
Item 9.
9. Any other item that any member wish pulled out and dealt with separately? Okay, if you would, Councillor Cluett, number 4.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick question for staff. This is regarding the Louis Saint Laurent design report and delegated authority for the construction, much needed and long awaited construction of Louis Saint Laurent to 4th line. Questions have come up from the public and I see some maps here behind me regarding input on decisions. I know that Freeman Trail in the report was slated to be a right-in, right-out access, and question the staff and a number of other things with the traffic circle at Kennedy Circle as well. If members of the public would be able to provide any input during this process, or if this was the previous approval was included in any of the other agreements.
Scripps.
Through you, Your Worship, the closure of Freeman Trail was addressed when we did the Boeing neighborhood plan. There are alternative routes, namely via Megan Way, Deacon Drive, and taking advantage of the new roundabout on Louis Saint Laurent will allow people to move in an easterly direction, if so required, coming from that neighborhood.
Thank you. No, I just, because I know that we've done the, from 25 to Vickerman Way, some number of the residents who were worried about the right-in, right-out access for Vickerman Way have found their way to using the roundabout in and around to get there. So I just wanted to illustrate to the public that it's a very similar situation. And before it gets completely closed off, is there an approximate time frame to let residents know when that will be closed off officially? If it will be done at this particular point or if it will be done at a later date?
Through you, Your Worship, well, we're proposing to go to tender on the project in the next few days. It's a 5-week tender process, so construction should be going in the spring. Closure will depend on the contractor's schedule, but you can probably count on something in early summer for that intersection to be closed.
So nothing waiting for the development to the south, because that's coming soon anyways. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Anything further on item number 4? Not Councillor Challoner. Number 9.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just a couple questions of clarification. The first thing is, my assumption is that the committee will continue to be called Heritage Milton.
Ms. Koopmans.
Through you, Your Worship, there's no issue with the name of the committee. It can be called Heritage Milton.
Okay, thank you. My second question relates to its approximate responsibilities vis-a-vis the old committee from the perspective of legislative responsibilities. Just very generally, I'm assuming they'll be approximately the same. I realize that some of that has to still to be negotiated, but just very generally.
Ms. Koopmans.
Through you, Your Worship, it depends on the constitution of the committee. If it is an ad hoc committee but is not a heritage committee under the meaning of the legislation, the legislative responsibilities would not necessarily apply. That is still open for discussion. We had a very productive meeting with members of both the Milton and Nassagaweya Historical Societies, as well as with Councillor Challoner, and I think it's through those ongoing discussions that we will really nail down what the responsibilities of the committee will be and what the expectations on all sides of the table will be.
Councillor Challoner.
Thanks, Your Worship.
Is there anything further on number 9? If not, again, you have the resolution that consent items numbers 1 to 9 as amended be approved. Questions on that resolution? None. Those in favor? That's carried. Okay, members of council and ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude the official part of this council meeting. As I had mentioned at the outset, Councillor Challoner will be assuming the chair here in just a moment, so if you give us about 2 minutes to get turned around, then the balance of the meeting will be conducted by Councillor Chandler. So, Councillor Chandler, if you would assume the chair, please. This council meeting is now adjourned.
As the mayor indicated, this is the public meeting portion of the agenda. Council will not make a final decision on any application this evening. Anyone who would like to be informed when the final report will be going to council, or anyone who wishes to speak but is not a registered delegate, please fill out the register located just outside the council chamber doors. So the first matter. This is a public meeting under the Planning Act for Staff Report PD 006-19. If there is anyone other than a representative of the applicant in the audience who would like to speak on this matter, please raise your hand. You will be given an opportunity to speak. Registered delegates will be given an opportunity to speak first. And I understand that there is one registered delegate. Yes. Is there anybody who wishes to speak for a second time? Yeah. Right. Okay. Would the applicant step forward then? Right. Yeah.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and members of the public. My name is Colin Chung of Glenn Schnarn Associates. I'm here on behalf of the applicant. Thank you. I will provide a brief presentation of the proposal. The application before you tonight, Mr. Chairman, is for a draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment. It is a site within the approved Boyne Survey secondary plan area, and the purpose of the application is to implement the town's official plan and the Boyne Survey secondary plan. The subject lands are located at the southwest corner of Louis St. Laurent Avenue and James Snow Parkway. It's about 46 acres in size. To the north, there is an existing residential community. To the west, there's a recently built school. To the south is vacant future residential development lands. And to the east of James Snow Parkway is planned and designated future employment lands. The town's official plan designates the subject lands as predominantly residential. As well, there is a natural heritage feature that traverses through this property. The residential designation in the official plan permits, Mr. Chairman, wide range and variety of housing types: single detached dwelling, semi-detached dwelling, townhouses. In the approved Boyne Survey secondary plan, There are more detailed land uses being prescribed for this subject lands. It is still predominantly residential destination. It does permit, again, the wide range and mix of housing types. The natural heritage feature has been detailed a little further in the Boyne Survey Secondary Plan. It's basically made up of a compilation of woodlot, a wetland, and a drainage channel. As well, additional layer of land use detail is provided in the secondary plan. You'll see, Mr. Chairman, at the very southeast quadrant, there's a checkered red block, and that's been destined for major node development in the future. Just for your information, Mr. Chairman, major node designation in the Boyne Survey Secondary Plan is intended to develop for higher intensity, higher density, mixed-use development. So unlike the predominant residential land uses in Boyne Survey, these major node locations are the locations of community focal point for retail and higher density residential. If I can get to more detailed proposal, what you see before you, Mr. Chairman, is the proposed draft plan of subdivision by the applicant. You'll see that the areas highlighted in yellow is predominantly single detached dwelling. They're basically sized to accommodate 2-car garages, conventional lot depth. There are also 82 standard street townhouses being proposed, as well as 72 back-to-back townhouses. The back-to-back townhouses are color schemed as, is that pink, Mr. Chairman? Pink, just south of Louis St. Laurent Avenue. And the townhouses flank on the north side and east side of the proposed future Greenland Channel. You can see that the block 135 at the southwest corner is the block that's been identified as a major node. It's about 4 acres in size, and that's a pretty good size to accommodate the type of intended land use, intensive mixed uses that is contemplated in the second plan. Main access to this subdivision in the future is the extension of Trudeau Drive from the north side of Louis St. Laurent Avenue. So it's a planning of allowing Trudeau Drive to be extended further south into the future community in Boyne Survey. To assess and demonstrate the merit of the proposal, the town of Milton required the proponent to submit various technical reports and drawings, and I'm not going to go through them all, but you can see from this slide that it's pretty substantive. It goes from assessing the soil on the ground to the servicing of the proposal to the, I call it the feasibility of the proposed development in terms of planning, in terms of engineering, in terms of urban design and community planning. The site is currently zoned future development, like any other urban areas in Milton. The proposed zoning change as a result of draft plan of subdivision and implementation of the draft plan of subdivision is basically 2 categories of the town's parent zoning. The first category is the RMD1 zone, which is predominantly related to the single detached dwelling. The second category is RMD2 zone, which is the back-to-back townhouses. As well, the major nodes being identified as a separate zoning, MU, which stands for mixed use in the parent zoning bylaw. You'll see in the zoning schedule, which is in draft, the wetland, the woodland, and the Greenland Channel all have been identified as a natural heritage system in the zoning bylaw. Along with that, there are appropriate buffers that interface and protect the Greenlands from the future residential mixed-use development. Mr. Chairman, in summary, it is my opinion that the proposed subdivision and zoning bylaw is consistent with the provincial policy statement. It conforms to the policies of the provincial growth plan and the region of Halton's official plan. It implements the town's official plan and intended land uses approved in the Boyne Survey secondary plan. The proposal does maximize the use of underutilized land in an area that's already been identified as a future residential development. As well, services are available to service this subdivision because of its proximity to existing services along Louis Saint Laurent and James Snow Parkway. I think this development will contribute to the vibrant and intended desired development of Milton in the future. And just for information, this development and the proponent has purchased or bought into the region's servicing allocation program. So there are services that this site has already been granted, approved by the region. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to respond to any questions.
Thanks for the presentation. At this point, I have one question from a member of council. Are there any others? Councillor Cluett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I got some other questions for staff, but for this one in particular, if we go back to where it was highlighted in pink, those were the townhomes. We've had some issues where further up on 4th line, where we've had either backyards or front yards facing the main street. Along Louis Saint Laurent, where you see the street F, will there be any fencing provided by the developer to sort of separate that from, I'm assuming there will be a pathway or a walkway or a sidewalk on there, but just from a privacy aspect and from a safety aspect, will there be any fencing as similar as to what Mattamy has done, had done further down on Louis Saint Laurent?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not quite certain what Mattamy had done on their subdivision, but in this particular case, the back-to-backs is separated by a public street F, as opposed to some other back-to-back designs that I'm familiar with, where you actually flank the one of the row of units right onto existing right-of-way. In this case, Louis Saint Laurent, and I think in those cases we've always introduced fencing to separate the public realm to the private realm. In this particular case, we have a future street F, which is a public road that separates existing Louis Saint Laurent to the front yards of the back-to-back townhouses. So it's something that, in my experience, we don't necessarily introduce additional fencing, but we'd be happy to entertain and discuss that with staff as this draft plan progresses further.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to point out, because that obviously, like I said, it would be a sidewalk or some form of pedestrian walkway along Louis Saint Laurent facing the street F, but just as a physical barrier, some kind of a barrier, if you want to discuss that, or if staff would like to discuss that.
And I made a note to make sure that we have that discussion with staff.
That would be great.
Yeah.
And as for that, everything else I have is for staff. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Di Lorenzo.
I'm not sure if this question may be for the developer or maybe for town staff. I saw the village square on the bottom left of the diagram, and I'm happy to see that there, because on the south portion, there's not many parks in that area because it's being developed. I know this is only the original report, and there'll be a technical report later. Any ideas of what that village square might be able to hold? It seems a little bit small, but I understand it's a small subdivision here. Is there a possibility of like a playground structure, or is it more just sort of like a focal green point?
Mr. Chairman, just as a contextual nature, this is a village square which is the lowest hierarchy in the town secondary plan in terms of hierarchy of parkland to be planned and provided in the future in Boyne Survey. So this particular village square is intended to provide a passive recreational space and will include a playground, pedestrian, I guess, walkway, potentially a gazebo for a shaded area for the residents. So those are the intended use. One thing that it does not provide is an active recreational facility because of the size and the nature of its function. It's intended to provide green space, gathering space, a playground space for children, and shaded structure for sitting areas. I hope that clarifies the intent of this village square.
Anything further?
Thank you.
Do you have any final comments you wish to make before I open this up to the public?
No, I just look forward to working with the town of Milton and the public and staff. Thank you.
Thank you. So I had this backward, as those of you who are familiar with the process will know. It is now the opportunity for the public to come forward if they so choose to ask any questions, make any comments they so choose. So, yeah, I do have one registered delegate. If that person wishes to step forward, they may be downstairs. All right. Please come forward, sir. And if you would state your name and your address once you get to the microphone, that would be appreciated, so the clerk can record that, and then your comments.
Yeah. Thank you, Council, for inviting me and giving me opportunity to talk on this project. My name is Arshad Sheikh, and I live in Milton for last 12 years. And I have a few comments on a couple environmental site assessment reports which are part of this development application. There were 2 environmental site assessment reports were submitted along this development application, and Phase 1 ESA and Phase 2 ESA. I have just like a question from Council, maybe just quickly, that I'm not sure whether Council, anyone from the town of Milton have reviewed these environmental reports. Anyone, engineer, who have opportunity to review those reports and provided some comments, or whether those reports meet the requirements or not. I'm not sure whether anyone knew about from the Council. And if not, then the first comment I have about these environmental reports, in Phase 1 ESA report, there's one comment, just like from the WSP, they provided one comment that there is a stockpile on the site. There's a big stockpile. I don't know when this was developed, but Phase 1 ESA report is saying this stockpile present in northwestern position of the property. It was reported by the site owner to be excess soil from the residential development to the north of the site. So this soil was brought from the north side development, which is currently residential subdivision. And when a consultant tested that soil, and they found some contamination in this soil. Now my question from the Council is that subdivision was built on a contaminated land or not? I don't know why they are saying that this development, which is on the north side, this brought soil from there. Now this soil is stockpiled, and WSP report is saying, okay, this is a contaminated soil. They found some exceedances. So I don't know what happened when that development was done, whether that development was done on a contaminated land or there was some other issues. I'm not aware that need to be addressed. Now other situation is that when I'm looking this report, Phase 2 or Phase 1, they mentioned there is one stockpile on a site. And if you go on site, there is another stockpile on site now, a big stockpile close to James Snow Parkway. And it looks like the site conditions are now changed because there's another environmental issue, potential environmental issue now exists on a site. So what I believe is consultant need updated Phase 1 and Phase 2, and consultant has to assess that stockpile. Because in consultant report, they mention only one stockpile. But now there are 2 stockpiles on site. So I don't know, the property owner, they changed the site conditions, so they are now need of. Other my comment is that consultant found that there is exceedance or contamination in a stockpile. I'm not sure, there is no any suggestion what will be done with this stockpile, how they will dispose, how they will dispose, and whether, what is their next steps for these, this stockpile. And I have also a few questions about the consistency of the report, just like I see there are some discrepancies when the report were prepared, and there are a few data gaps, I can say, just like a data gaps in the report. I think there's the environmental, Phase 2 environmental site assessment report have some data gaps, and in my opinion, that should be addressed. If as a consultant present here, I can also talk and raise those issues with him, or if you guys want, I can send you by a written, just like what are my concern about the reports, and then either consultant can reply or town can reply, and we make sure that everything is addressed. There is no any environmental or any issue with the site before council approve for this application.
So you've now completed your presentation?
Yes, I have
Okay.
completed.
So I'm going to ask Paul, first of all, if he wishes to comment, provide some background on the questions you've raised about the soil that's been set aside. Barb may pipe in. At any rate, I would recommend that you provide a written copy of your remarks to the clerk, so that we have it for the record. If you wish to add to the statement you've made tonight, please do, but do so quickly.
Yes,
and they'll be a part of the record.
That will I will raise just like a bullet point.
And it's quite conceivable that staff may decide, in fact, to provide a written comment back to you as part of the process. It is a public meeting.
Yes.
And this is not the end of the discussion, it's the
Yes.
beginning. So, Paul or Barb, do you wish to respond?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, this is a planning meeting, a planning public meeting, so where people can bring concerns like this forward. So we'll make sure that as part of the technical report, we address these concerns for council. They'll have all the information at that time.
So in that case, I would recommend that you get your written comments in to the clerk as soon as possible, so that staff fully understand your concerns and can respond to them intelligently.
Okay, no problem.
Do you have any
But just
further
like-
comments you wish to make?
Sorry?
Do you have any further final comments you wish to make?
Yeah, either just one more comment about just like is town because my understanding that whenever there is a report or design or anything submitted to the town should review those reports and make sure those reports are, suppose there is some design, they have to make sure that consultant prepare design, and we should review that report. We should review that report and make sure that that is consistent with the regulation or design aspects. But it looks like when environmental assessment reports are submitted to the town, then at least from town no one is reviewing from the town. So I don't know what's your plan for that, and you guys can. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for your comments. Before you leave, I do have a councillor who wishes to ask you a question. Councillor
Okay.
Mead.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to, through you, Mr. Chair, see if staff could specify the process, because I want members of the public to understand that we're actually not approving anything tonight. It's just the beginning of the process. So I think it would be useful to repeat the timelines involved.
Good point. Barb wishes to make a comment, and perhaps with your comment you can provide some sense to the delegation and to the audience in terms of what you see as potential timelines for this this process, this application.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we are at very early stages in terms of the review of this application. It has been recently submitted, along with all the supporting studies and reports that were identified by not only the town, but also by our partner agencies through a pre-consultation process. Part of our evaluation of the application includes reviewing the reports for adequacy and to ensure that they meet current legislative requirements in terms of reference prepared by the region and the town. So by virtue of submission of the report, they are under review at this time. We have not received comments back as to determine their adequacy. In terms of timeline, we have circulated the application. Typically, it is an iterative process, so there will be some ongoing discussion and negotiation. There may be resubmission required prior to bringing a technical report back to council. Through that technical report, we will address all the concerns raised here tonight, as well as other concerns raised by agencies and the public through the consultation process. So that will be some time off, and really it is dependent largely on how the comments received, what level of analysis they require and what level of resubmission they require, and the review of that resubmission. So there's a longer process ahead. I'd also like to point out that if anyone wishes to receive notification when that technical report is coming forward, please ensure that you've signed the list at the back or provided written comments and asked to be notified, and that will form part of the record so that you will be notified when the technical report is brought forward.
Any further questions?
That's it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thanks you. Thank you very much.
Are there any other members of the public who wish to address council and staff on this application for a second time? For a third and final time, is there anybody who wishes to address council and staff on this application? As there are no more speakers, I'll now read out the, actually, I should ask council if they have any questions they wish to ask. Yes. Councillor Meade.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, as you know, we approved the Louis-Saint-Laurent expansion until 4th line earlier in this meeting. What's the timeline from 4th line to James Snow? Through you, Mr. Chair, to staff.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that project is scheduled for construction next year.
Excellent. That's what I want to clarify for the members of the public, for the record. Thank you.
Further to that, yeah, because we have the widening happening for 2019, and as the Commissioner mentioned, further on till James Snow Parkway the year after. My question for the Commissioner Cripps is future plans for 4th line south of Louis-Saint-Laurent. I know a significant, well, a good portion of this development fronts 4th line, which, as we all know, is a 2-lane road, classified, I don't know if it's the rural portion, but is there any future plans to, or in the short term, to deal with, the increased traffic that's going to be going up and down through there, because that's where the exit for Kielburger's secondary school is, or if there's going to be any future plans for widening?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, 4th line is a local road, so it'll be the developer's responsibility to urbanize that road in conjunction with the development in the area. So, yes, the road will be improved and properly addressed as part of the subdivision process.
Any more? Yes, Councillor Malbouf.
I'm done, thanks.
You're done.
That was.
I thought you were.
I thought you had already moved on, so that's okay.
No, I was watching and I thought you were done. Councillor Malbouf.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question on behalf of, I'm sure the residents, every time there's a new development, there's always concern about traffic, access, especially on a major road like Louis-Saint-Laurent. So as part of our evaluation, I know we take a look at the traffic impact, both vehicle and pedestrian, but just for, on my behalf, do we go back and look at other developments that are now completed and evaluate what the actual traffic is compared to what the projection was when the application came forward? Do we compare to see how accurate we are in these projections?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we will endeavor to do traffic counts as development occurs, but to be able to tie it to specific developments, it's almost impossible. But we will be monitoring traffic growth in the area to see how it does match up to the projections when we started the Boeing survey, for instance.
Anything further? Councillor Di Lorenzo.
I guess one question on Councillor Malbouf's question. I noticed the report mentioned a drive-through, and he was kind of a possible use in the mixed-use node. Kind of mentioned, like, let's hear all the possible usage in there. And one of them, I thought, listed that. I have to go back, but just because we did have a drive-through by Santa Maria, and I know there was a study on that as well, and there was a lot of traffic, I thought, going in and out the drive-through more than we originally estimated. So yeah, I mentioned drive-through facilities. So if one of those drive-through facilities is like a food drive-through, would we study what our past report was and see if that information has changed? Because that past report, that site's been more than successful, and there are times when it seems to almost back into Santa Maria.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, for that corner site to development, it would have to go through the site plan control process. As part of that process, we would ask for a traffic impact study that would identify traffic volume or projected traffic volumes in conjunction with what the actual use that they're proposing for that site would be. So the answer is yes, we would go back, keeping in mind the history of development in the community and what current traffic practices are in form of predicting traffic volumes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Okay, I'm now going to call the vote, there being no other questions. It's been moved by Councillor Cluett, seconded by Councillor Ali, that be it resolved that Planning and Development Report PD 006-19 be received for information. All those in favor, raise your hands. It's carried. The next two public meeting items are going to be combined. They essentially are very, very similar in terms of what they propose to discuss. And these are Staff Report PD 008-19 and Staff Report PD 009-19. Is the applicant in the audience? Megan? Okay.
Good evening, Council. My name is Megan Lovell. I'm the policy planner from the town managing the Egerton and Trafalgar secondary plan processes. Last year, Council endorsed the kickoff of the Egerton and Trafalgar secondary plans as the first two secondary plans for Milton's Phase 4 of development, which has an associated time frame of 2021 to 2031. We formally kicked off the secondary plan process in April of 2018. Since that time, we've had multiple public engagement touch points on the process in the form of public engagement sessions and less formal events such as farmers markets visits. Tonight is a statutory public meeting under the Planning Act, and the town consulting lead, Matthew Corey from Malone Given Parsons, will give a presentation on how we got to where we are and give an overview of the two proposed plans. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of council, staff, and certainly the public. Very happy to be here before you tonight. My name is Matthew Corey. I'm with the planning firm Malone Given Parsons. We are your consultants for the town in preparing these two secondary plans. I'm also joined, I'd be remiss to not note, joined by a team of experts who worked on the plan with myself, Miss Emily Grant, Miss Ashley Barter, Matthew Heather, and Mr. Brett Sears from WSP, who is here as well. This is a joint secondary plan transportation environmental assessment process that we've undertaken on the town's behalf over, I'd say, the last 7 months. The significance of that is that we are completing both the Planning Act requirements for preparing the secondary plan under your official plan for the planning of this portion of the Sustainable Halton lands. We are also concurrently doing the environmental assessment for phases 1 and 2 of the roads. And I will endeavor to go through this fairly quickly because obviously we're here tonight to absolutely hear any thoughts or questions or comments council may have to direct us, but most importantly to hear from the public and any comments. We have not heard from them yet. In terms of the secondary plans, the secondary plan in your official plan functions like all your other secondary plans. It provides a more detailed land use planning framework to guide development applications. One significant note I will make for council and the public, there's essentially two types of secondary plans that can be done. One that is more of a policy secondary plan that relies on tertiary planning to occur, another phase of planning to occur, to sort out more details prior to receiving development applications. The other is one that builds that into the secondary plan itself and adopts something that is ready immediately to receive development applications. We are talking about the former in this case. We're preparing more of a policy level secondary plan that very much is contingent on the completion of a tertiary plan following this, typically led by the developers and developer groups, to work with town staff to prepare the more detailed aspects of the local road patterns, servicing details, phasing in this case, and I will go through some of the policy directives that we have that bridge the official plan to that tertiary plan process. This is a very simplistic graphic we used, and you may recall some of you when I was here before you on the land-based analysis to illustrate quite simply the function of secondary plans at a, what I like to call a SimCity level of detail. Simplified to show that there's multiple neighborhoods that fit in a community, and together they form the basis for not just having their own individual neighborhood centers, but also more of a secondary school, place of worship, and other centers. Where we are in the process, we've been moving through this fairly quickly. We are getting to the point now where we are before you today at the statutory public meeting and are looking to incorporate comments we receive and come back before you in March to council, seeking, and I need to differentiate this to be clear, the council adoption of the Trafalgar area secondary plan, but we are not going to be bringing back to you the Egerton secondary plan just yet. The main reason being that the region's official plan identifies it currently as an employment area, which does not permit residential and mixed uses. And because of, and as I will get into in this presentation, because of the universal desire, I would say, across the town and even amongst the developers to realize a GO station and to realize a transit supportive development around that GO station, which is what we are planning for in the secondary plan, there's a bit of a different process required with the region. So we are finishing the process now. The environmental assessment process is running concurrent with the Planning Act process. Planning Act process being the official plan amendment and secondary plan, ultimately that it gets incorporated into your official plan. The environmental assessment process that looks at the road requirements and fulfills the requirement under that act. Mr. Brett Sears has led that for us. We have a draft report that you have not seen yet. We are nearing completion of it within, I would say, the next week, at which point your staff and council and the public will have access to this report. And certainly we're looking to have the work completed in March of 2019, commensurate with this coming back to you and to your council for consideration for adoption of Trafalgar secondary plan. We did quite a lot of public outreach, and I have to say we did 2 PICs, Public Information Centers, held here at town offices. They were both very well attended. The first one, we were very much looking at visioning and looking at laying out some of the key aspects we're looking at in terms of developing the secondary plan. We heard from the community on key themes of creating a complete community and an innovation district. We heard very much as part of that the importance of protecting for and providing the opportunity for a diversity of jobs. We heard the desire for a well-serviced community, this meaning in our minds both the physical servicing, but also quite rightly the community infrastructure, the schools, the parks, all of the other amenities and services that residents would expect to see as they move into this area. A sustainable community, a connected community, and of course an attractive community. The second PIC we held on December 4th. That was a bit of a different PIC because at this point we presented in one shot the different secondary plan options, the preferred option, the evaluation of those options, and key policy directives that we were looking at to seek consultation on and comment. And in that regard, we were very successful, I think, in getting very specific comment that helped us greatly in drafting the secondary plan policies that are in the draft secondary plans before you. With that, I'm going to dive right into some of these. Just to remind everyone, we have 2 secondary plan areas we're talking about today. In total, we have, in total gross area, it's just over 1,000 hectares. A significant portion of which you can see in the green color on that aerial photography. The green color is the region's natural heritage system as modified through minutes of settlement. That is treated as non-developable in the secondary plan. It's to be protected as per the policies of the region and your own official plan. It's the residual area that is not covered by the green that is the subject for consideration for any development in these areas. The northern portion is the Egerton secondary plan area. That area is approximately 295 hectares of gross developable area. This is after the NHS has been removed. The southern portion is the Trafalgar secondary plan area south of Derry Road. That is approximately 486 hectares. The 2 secondary plans combined work together as part of the Trafalgar corridor in your portion of, in your municipality in this portion of the region, and the options very much so looked at and contemplated a potential GO station, which you can see in the very middle of the Egerton secondary plan area with a white dot as a potential GO station location. I should emphasize that GO station is aspirational, but one I think that is we believe and the town staff believe is very achievable and something that we are planning towards. And in my experience, these things manifest into reality because there's plans that rely on them, there's plans that depend on them and work towards complementary land uses that are around them, and those are the kind of commitments that certainly Metrolinx and others look to in terms of seeing whether there should be a commitment here for a new GO station. So we had looked at 3 options and landed on a preferred. All 3 are shown up on the screen. The options are not meant to be small variants of each other. In each of the 3 options, we were testing very distinct and different ideas we had heard through the first PIC. The first option is very much in keeping with what was in the land base analysis. Very heavy focus on density in the Trafalgar corridor, and I should say no mixed use and no residential in the Egerton secondary plan area. This is sort of the, I don't want to call it do-nothing case, but it was the conforming with current policy case that we had to show what simple conformity with current standards are. The options 2 and 3 provide variations on a potential GO station in that purple color, or periwinkle. The potential GO station is shown in alternating locations, with the major transit station area being the high-density, mixed-use, more urban area that would be around it, migrating with the location of the GO station. What you're also seeing now is slightly lower density and a different distribution of density in the Trafalgar corridor to the south as population begins to be realized in this area. And in the final preferred option, based on a lot of consultation, we heard that there was a very strong desire to allow for a full mix of uses in the entirety of southern Egerton, which is an extension of the darker purple, which forms the major transit station area proper, along with employment possibilities and mixed use to the southern part of Egerton. The northern part of Egerton is an employment area, an area of employment, but the policies drafted in the plan would prohibit land extensive users with the very express purpose of trying to promote somewhat of an office incubator for smaller users who would come in and be very job intensive is the aspiration in that regard. In the southern portion on the preferred plan, we have a distribution of densities that very much focuses on providing density and intensity of use on potential higher order transit stops along Trafalgar corridor, and then providing a mix of densities throughout the rest of the area in more of a typical neighborhood format. This is the evaluation. I won't go into it in detail, but needless to say, the preferred option scored the highest in our opinion on the different evaluation criteria we had crafted and vetted with the technical agencies and with your staff and with the public, and especially with the landowners group. And with that, I'm just going to dive right into the Trafalgar secondary plan urban structure and some of its elements. There's some basic structural elements we've created. We purposely called these evolving neighborhood areas. This is in direct contrast to other areas that are stable neighborhood areas. The very real intention here is to encourage reasonable and appropriate intensification over time, and acknowledge from the get-go that these areas will evolve over time into something more urban in an appropriate grade-related fashion. So the policies of the plan certainly anticipate that beyond the 2031 horizon, intensification of a limited scale and appropriate scale will happen and is appropriate to happen in these areas. It was important to us to message that both to you and to the public so that future residents had a clear understanding there was an expectation of evolution and change in this area, even if they had just moved in, even if they had just bought into this area. There's these blue circles you see are local centers. They're intended to serve as the conventional sort of neighborhood center, generally supporting the co-location of parks and schools, although there has been some debate over whether co-location has benefits to one or the other. Certainly we support the co-location of the uses regardless, and the benefits can find themselves later. We can't put those uses back together if they're not co-located today. So the co-location of schools and parks and the potential for local serving retail only, this is smaller scale retail, as well as places of worship exist in these smaller centers. They're generally located at the key collector roads and optimize walkability, and they can also accommodate some medium-density clustering to provide potential a bit of density internal to the neighborhoods that could support local transit, first and last mile transit solutions. Neighborhood centers in the Trafalgar Plan are intended to be more of the bigger neighborhood center. The key factor in this is that they're being planned in keeping with the growth plan of approximately 160 residents and jobs per hectare as smaller major transit station areas under the growth plan typology. And they would also accommodate some of the larger retail that would occur in the plan. This is where people will shop. This is where they will catch the higher order transit to get onto Trafalgar Road and go south. And we also felt it was very important to have the focus of activity and of density in the plan to be located around the transit potential itself. The natural heritage system, as I discussed, is very much so from the region's natural heritage system modified by the Minutes of Settlement. There is a sub-watershed plan ongoing, and I saw that as of 3 hours ago, we got Conservation Halton comments. We are certainly very much discussing these plans and have been with all the agencies that would be looking at them, including the region, including Conservation Halton. And they have been part of the process since the very beginning and have understood the direction this is headed in. Fully anticipate to have a bit more discussion with them, but also see these plans as aligning with them and the emerging sub-watershed study. One of the things that we've heard is the region and the Conservation Authority raising some concern over proceeding with the secondary plan when the sub-watershed study had not yet been fully completed. I can say that from our team's perspective, we cannot see any change that would come to the secondary plans as a result of those plans completing, quite simply because a lot of the requirements of the secondary plan require the tertiary plan to move forward, do additional study, and have refinement possibilities as part of that. And all of the changes or anything that comes out of the sub-watershed study can easily be accommodated through that process without amendment to this plan. So in terms of land use, the yellow areas you see here are within these evolving neighborhoods. They are the low-density residential areas. They are consistent with the general framework of your official plan. Just one thing to note, we are proposing that a maximum of the units could be 15% of street townhouses would be permitted. This is very much to encourage a commingling of unit types within the neighborhoods, but still maintain generally the majority of units being single and semi-detached units, thereby achieving a grade-related lower density feel. The minimum density, and a lot of the densities you're going to see I present tonight are minimums. That is for the purpose of achieving the minimum density requirements for the growth plan and the region's official plan is handed to you. Is 27 units per hectare, which is generally a mix of single and semis and some townhouses. It generally reflects that unit mix I discussed. Medium density residential 1 is spread out purposely through the plan area, ideally in pockets along the collector roads and at key locations with collector road and arterial road intersections. This would permit single semi-detached street townhouses. However, the bit of the inverse is happening here. Only a maximum of 20% of the units in this designation could be singles and semis. It's to allow a bit of bleeding between the density designations and to allow for transition where it's appropriate as development applications come forward to you. The density range is 35 to 60 units per hectare. That's very typical for townhouses. And the maximum build height is 4 stories. Medium density 2, much more smaller and generally located as a transition out of the neighborhood areas, the higher density areas, the neighborhood centers. This is where more intensity of stacks and back-to-back townhouses, multiplexes, and even low-rise apartments could occur. There's a note here, and it's incorrect, and I have to correct that. The policy is not proposing to have 20% singles or semis. That's a mistake on the presentation deck. That is not in the secondary plan or its proposed policies. I apologize for that. And density range of 60 to 100 units per hectare is what would be permitted in this designation. Medium density mixed use. This is, if you recall, locating generally where those local centers were shown. And the purpose here is that you can do medium density in those centers, or you could do the local retail, or you could have a co-location with a school or a park. It's a fairly flexible designation that has to be fully refined through the tertiary plan process and finalized in terms of its ultimate layout. The Neighborhood Center Mixed Use 1 and the Neighborhood Center Mixed Use 2 generally are a similar designation around the transit, and they allow for the much larger retail to occur at a minimum density of 100 residents and jobs per hectare. And here we show the distribution. We think we've achieved a very good distribution that's very walkable through the secondary plan of 2 district parks in this plan, another district park when we get to Egerton, 9 neighborhood parks, 6 elementary schools, 1 secondary school, which align with what we've heard from the school boards in terms of what their needs are and the requirements relative to the population, 2 places of worship, and possibility for co-location of facilities. We were asked as part of this to prepare an initial phasing plan. We're all too aware of the region's allocation program and the interaction of that ultimately with this phasing plan. There is a policy in the secondary plan that allows the phasing plan to be modified in any way possible through the tertiary plan process to the satisfaction of the town staff and yourselves. What we show here is based on work we received from Wood, who is not part of our team, but we're working cooperatively with them as a fellow consultant for the town, to prepare and look at the sequencing of when regional infrastructure will be delivered into the area and the areas that can be physically serviced commensurate with that delivery of regional infrastructure. That is, of course, subject to change, subject to front funding or advancement or changes of the timing of regional infrastructure. This aligns with the region's current infrastructure plans, and what you see is generally a progression from north to south in terms of the delivery. We've had quite, and continue to have quite a lot of discussion with the landowners group on this phasing plan. They have some suggested thoughts that we are looking at right now. Understanding, of course, it can be modified in any way going forward. And we'll continue to talk to them prior to coming back to you and landing on something, hopefully, that is satisfactory across the board prior to March. Egerton, much simpler plan in a lot of ways. The southern area is the most complicated. There's a GO station that is potential. We don't know yet where that GO station will occur, whether it will be on the west side, whether it will be on the east side. The policies of the plan commensurately reflect flexibility to deal with that. They provide guidance to say that around the ultimate GO station, there will be a major transit station area of a minimum density of 300 residents and jobs per hectare. We have supporting material that looked at the potential to create a new employment node in this area for office. We feel it's aspirational but achievable that up to approximately 1 million square feet of office could ultimately manifest in this area around the GO station in the surrounding area. And we're planning for that to be achieved ideally in the time frame, like 20-year horizon of the secondary plan, but as it's able to, but certainly providing the structure and all the right language and policy direction to encourage that. This area would provide the greatest intensity of density and activity in the entire corridor, and that is commensurately focused with the intersection of the Trafalgar higher order transit leading right into the GO station. It is the gateway in a lot of ways and the travel path for people north in Halton Hills, from people in Oakville, and certainly for your residents to move through and up and down the Trafalgar corridor and onto the larger transportation and transit network. Around the major transit station area, we expect to also have, to some extent, a mixed-use residential neighborhood, no singles and semis permitted in this case, and a mixed-use employment office priority area. They have their commensurate minimum densities and use permissions, where in the mixed-use office employment area, the policy proposed is that residential would only be permitted if it was less than 50% of the GFA in a mixed-use building. The intent there being to allow residential only when accompanied with other uses, particularly employment uses. And these uses and the policy set allows for the finalization through the tertiary plan, but provides enough guidance about the general size and density of these uses so that when that manifests, there's enough guidance to proceed with a tertiary plan and program them into the final secondary plan land uses. The north area is a general employment area that is to very much so reacts to it being isolated from the south by the hydro corridor and reacting to its exposure to the 401 and the interchange in that location. Certainly, and this is something I know Ms. Hogan's going to present to you later, the draft provincially significant employment zone mapping from the province under the proposed Amendment 1 to the growth plan shows this whole area as part of that zone. We are suggesting, especially to allow for the southern area to manifest as a full mixed-use area, that the province remove the southern area from that mapping. However, the northern area, I think, is appropriate and properly shown as an employment area in that regard. And of course, there's policies there to discourage large land extensive users. The comments we heard generally on that was there was a desire to not create another employment area for warehousing, logistics, but very much so to provide for smaller scale office uses and more employment focus in those uses in terms of jobs. The neighborhood center in this case functions very much so, and is the northern portion of the one that's in the Trafalgar secondary plan area. Similar, it has 160 residents and jobs per hectare, and it's intended to allow for major retail. The other thing I should note in the southern area of Egerton, this is the one area where district level retail would be permitted. Being the very larger scale retail that we believe is required to support the residents' shopping needs in this area. Natural heritage system, again, as with the Trafalgar secondary plan, as per the region's NHS modified through minutes of settlement. And in terms of land uses, the major transit station area is very much so like very much a structural land use at this point. It has to manifest into the three more discrete elements I described before. The mixed use area and neighborhood has its density requirement of 35 to 60 units per hectare, and it's intended more than anything, and you can see on the plan there's a district park and a place of worship and a school shown. We're very conscious of the fact that there may be quite a few residents. We're talking as many as a few thousand apartments and some other residential potential transitioning out from that. These people will also need a park and also need a place of worship and also need a school to serve their needs, as urban as it will be and as urban as it's intended to be in the MTSA. That's why this is located here. It does provide a balance of uses through the whole secondary plan. And one thing I did not mention earlier, and you can see it if I go back a bit, is when you look overall at the overall secondary plan and the structure, we have a trail network that is a little hard to read on this, but you see the lines going through the natural heritage system. That is the active transportation and trail network. What we are proposing, and I apologize, it's not very clear on this depiction, but it is in the secondary plan schedules, is very much a full active transportation network that traverses the entirety of the area, connects almost every park, every school, and allows for someone to get on a bike or start jogging and in the fullness of time move through the entirety of the area without accessing a car. It was very much expressed to us the importance of having that. And certainly, we are proposing a sufficient amount of roads, arterial roads, not arterial roads, but collector roads through the plan area to service the automobile needs and the transportation needs. But these roads are to be planned as complete streets. They're supposed to accommodate all movement of all users. And very much so, and when we were doing the transportation work, although the roads we provide are met with the modeling that's done and we're providing sufficient roads, there is a very real expectation both in the transportation modeling and in the design of this plan that active transportation will not be something nice to have, that it will actually be used and that the transit modal split will be achieved. I dare say there may be even more roads in this plan if we had not made those assumptions. But we think we've struck the right balance of providing sufficient roads while also an active transportation system and connections with the transit system to provide a full modal split through this area. Lastly, the mixed-use office priority area, I talked about this briefly before. It does have more intensive residential uses, but only in a mixed-use format permitted. This is intended to accommodate employment users. The other thing I will note here, because there's the potential for residential, there's generally not a permission for noxious or very noisome users to be located in this area, whereas they could be in the northern area, just because of minimum distance separation and other concerns with heavier industrial uses being possible and located close to residential. So again, there's the district park and the elementary school and the place of worship. So next steps, and then I promise I'm done, unless you have questions. We are going to continue with the phase 3 work. We are more or less completed with the draft secondary plan, the schedules, and all of the background studies that our team has been preparing. The one major one yet to hit the presses sort of for the public and for you is, as I said, the transportation plan. I can tell you, though, that the modeling coming out of that supports and shows that this works when modeled in the regional context with region transportation movements and with the approximate 32,000 people that would be in this area and 19,000 jobs split between the Egerton and Trafalgar secondary plan. We don't expect any surprises there. It's more finalization of that report and putting it out to the public. We do expect to come back to you with the finalized reports and seeking, as we move through and we incorporate all the comments we received tonight and through agency comments we've just received, and I'm sure we'll receive in the next few days, a finalized Trafalgar secondary plan, and more than likely have a refined Egerton secondary plan that you can move forward, I would say, as input into the region's municipal comprehensive review process that is ongoing. That being said, I'd be remiss in not advising you and making it you aware that with the draft growth plan, there are other opportunities, not least of which to look at the conversion of employment lands outside of a municipal comprehensive review process that may present themselves to you all in very short order, like maybe in April, potentially, depending on how quickly the province moves with this new growth plan. That's partly why we're here tonight still with the Egerton secondary plan for a statutory public meeting, anticipating that this could still move forward in a timely fashion, just on a slightly different time track than Trafalgar. So to clarify, we will only be bringing at this point Trafalgar back to you for consideration for adoption and then forwarding to the region as an official plan amendment in March. And at that point, we will also have the final report that completes the phase 1 and 2 municipal class EA for the roads. So with that, I thank you. I'm sorry that was quite a lot to go through. There's 2 secondary plans. I am here at your discretion to answer any questions you have. I have members of my team here in case there's more technical nature that I want to rely on them for. And then certainly I'm here more than anything eagerly to hear from the public and get any comments we can have to help finalize and get these plans before you in short order.
Thank you for the presentation. Before I entertain questions from council to you, are there any comments of clarification that staff wish to make? No? Yeah, it was a pretty thorough presentation. First question is from Councillor Hamid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank staff through you for all the work they've done for this. It's an exciting possibility, especially considering how many Miltonians travel west. Growing closer to Mississauga makes sense. My question is, the potential of GO Station is exciting, but have you had any conversation with Metrolinx or private funders, or potentially even federal government, considering the major announcement they made a few days ago?
I believe Mr. Mann might be best able to answer this question as he's been having those discussions.
If I may,
here, Mr. Chair.
Matthew, you have to turn off your mic. If I may, Mr. Chairman, yes, we've had high-level discussions with Metrolinx, the province, the region, and I'm encouraged by the possibilities of affecting certain land swaps agreements between the landowners and amongst themselves and with the province itself in terms of bringing forward the GO train station through Metrolinx. At this point in time, that's all I can say, but I know that the discussions have been going really well.
That's good enough. Now, you spoke about population density. In your ideal case, anyone who wants to take the question, if everything goes according to plan, a dream scenario, how many jobs might we be looking at in the entirety of the secondary plan, both of them?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it would be approximately 19,000 in total, but definitely the majority of those jobs would be located in Egerton. The anticipation is there may be some potential for jobs in Trafalgar, but most of those would be population related, so schools, retail, personal services, those kinds of things. There is some small potential maybe for an office use or two in some of the neighborhood centers, but because the focus and the I think the excitement for employers would be experienced around the transit possibilities and a more urban solution around the GO station in Egerton, I would expect, and certainly I haven't heard anything from many of our team, including Cushman Wakefield, who did the office analysis for us, that it would be anything other than up there. One thing I will say, when we looked at the potential here, there's nothing here right now, and we're creating something where there is nothing. But that being said, there's a lot of potential from that GO station and from the intersection with regional transit, and our team was keenly aware of that. And I have to say, the landowners and their consultants were very much aware of that and very excited about that possibility. We had a lot of discourse over that during the preparation of the secondary plan, and certainly our approach was to look at what was aspirational and reasonable as far as we could push it, essentially, for how many jobs could be here. In looking at Markham Center or the Vaughan Metropolitan Center or other suburban, urban centers that are being developed and around transit, they can take anywhere from 3 to 7% of the GTA office market. So we were planning for about 3% because we thought that was appropriate, being located here of the entire GTA office market, which I will say is very aspirational, but reasonable in context and comparison. It will develop over time, though, for sure. I mean, urbanity takes time to develop and to redevelop and come to its ultimate form, and we think the policies in the plan recognize that and correctly speak to it and allow for that evolution.
Thank you. Just one quick question. 19,000 is a great number, and as you know, Mr. Chair, through economic development, they will be able to reduce the tax pressures on residential growth. So it's a really good number to have. And just for the record, these are not low-rise warehouse type jobs that we see in Milton, are they? Are they more office type? What kind of jobs do you envision?
And Councillor, there is a full, they won't be warehousing jobs for the very simple reason that we've prohibited them in policy. So that cannot happen as currently proposed in the secondary plan unless Council allows for an amendment there. That being said, the majority of the jobs we are forecasting and looking at around 1 million square feet are definitely office of one form or another. I would expect there to be a range of office uses if this develops as we hope it will and intend it to. Certainly the office uses you may see in the northern parts of Egerton will not look like the ones that may be in the MTSA. Where there's a possibility of having multi-story buildings in the MTSA for office, again, in the fullness of time. I would expect more 1- and 2-story office buildings of a more modest scale in the Egerton North area. So, but generally, it's mainly office. There is a significant amount of retail job potential as well, and then population-related generally beyond that, which is schools and personal service. The secondary plan does lay out the expectations, and certainly the background studies we prepared, certainly our background study, the population and employment background study, specifies what we're assuming to be those potentials. So there is guidance even going into the tertiary plan stage about what should be protected for, what should be planned for, what should be achieved. It's not, even though there's flexibility in these plans, I don't want you to mistake that for, or the public to mistake that for uncertainty in terms of what the outcomes are intended to be. Those are very clearly articulated in terms of job numbers and densities, and we've worked hard to provide a flexible structure that no matter where things are located, we will get the sizes, the amounts, the expectations of jobs and density that we're anticipating to have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Malboof, then Councillor Cluett, and Councillor Ali. Councillor Malboof.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A little further to what Councillor Mead spoke to about the GO station. It's quite evident from the presentation, and you mentioned that GO station numerous times, so it seems that, you know, in order for this development to be feasible, we need that GO station. So my question is, what comes first? Is this development, did I understand properly that the master plan or this development wouldn't come forward until the GO station is confirmed? And, you know, we've all had promises. We know, you know, this government changes its mind quite often, so there's no guarantee. So my question is this development contingent on the GO station being confirmed and it will be there, or is it build it and they will come?
Through you, Mr. Chair, certainly this is contingent on the GO station occurring. As you correctly note in the secondary plan, a master plan, there isn't really any phasing in the Egerton secondary plan, but there's a prerequisite that the GO station location be understood so that the master plan can unfold and lay out those three primary uses that I discussed. I will say this, in my experience in watching, just, you know, academically and professionally how these things manifest, I have seen them manifest when municipalities put their money where their mouth is, for lack of a better way of saying it, and put plans in place that are dependent on the GO station. Communicate to the province, we are working towards achieving your objective as well. We are trying to support transit with land use. We are trying to have a diversity of employment around these areas, and you have to be partners with us and deliver this GO station as part of that and work towards that. That is the way I have seen suburban GO stations that weren't on the books before become a reality. And our team has certainly discussed it at length, because it is, how does it be achieved? How do we get that to be there? And I think we are confident in putting forward a plan that is completely relying on it, so that it is that much of a necessity when Mr. Mann and when your council generally and your mayor is talking to the province and saying we need to have this become a reality. We need it to be here. We're counting on it. We're doing all the right things. We're providing the right kind of development around it. And we need this to have it function in the fullness of the town's urban structure and what we're trying to aspire towards.
Okay, thank you for that answer. My second question, I don't know if it's to the delegation or maybe staff can respond, and is I'm wondering why we're considering this planning option instead of building out the communities south of Britannia and east of Tremaine. Isn't it going to be more costly to service this area than would it be to develop the southwest corner of Tremaine and Britannia? Why are we going here instead of finishing that off over there?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, as part of the overall urban structure and as part of the council orientation earlier this year, we looked at focusing on employment opportunities. There is a considerable amount of residential development still retained in the Boyne Survey secondary plan. And so from a residential supply, we will be able to provide that, whereas the Trafalgar Corridor affords a tremendous opportunity as a catalyst for employment uses, supporting not only local but regional, inter and intra-regional transit options, looking at capitalizing on higher density development. It really is a different form of development and something that will contribute to Milton's growth as a whole. It is consistent with the council-endorsed future urban structure, looking at the Trafalgar Corridor and really capitalizing on those employment uses. But as Mr. Corey and Mr. Mann have both said this evening previously, we really need that form of development to support a future GO station, and all our discussions with Metrolinx have really been predicated on that supportive form of development in that location as well.
That's fine, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could also add on that, the region has already spent a great deal of money investments in servicing that area, the Trafalgar Corridor, by bringing the services up towards Georgetown. So development along this area or in this geographic area will be able to take advantage of that money that's already basically in the ground.
Any further questions, Councillor Melboof? Councillor Cluett?
I have the same things, same concerns, but the Metrolinx, I'm very glad that we're keeping them in the loop as to this process. And I just, so other than that, my questions were answered there. I just wanted to commend the staff and everybody involved during this whole process. It's a very innovative way. If anybody who's been here, members of the public or members of council, had been here during that process, the lobbies were filled with people. We had our side rooms active, and people were actually around the tables providing their input. Very innovative and new way of doing things. So I just wanted to compliment you on that process, and hopefully as we go forward, moving forward, we can do more of those very similar programs. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I have a question. I see that both of these secondary plans are flanked by highways, and my concern is regarding noise. And I was wondering if noise assessment studies will be done for noise, future noise management, because with the potential of a GO station coming in, that just adds to that noise factor.
And certainly through you, Mr. Chair. Councillor, the noise studies weren't done as part of this, partly because they're such a high level. And where there will be exposure directly to the highway is there's no residential permissions. It's non-sensitive users being employment users along the 401, certainly. And where there's the rail corridor and potential to be near to that, certainly noise will be a factor in mitigating it. Although I would dare say less so if they tend to be higher density residential buildings ultimately in proximity to it. We're not talking necessarily, and we're not imagining for sure, that there would be any single or semi-detached units permitted in the Egerton secondary plan, which would be the only place you'd have that interface. But even around the MTSA, which you would think would be the flank, even if it was locating in different locations, next to the rail corridor, there would be higher density uses and employment uses in that area. So certainly noise will become a factor to be looked at, although because of those fundamentals, I don't expect them to be major issues in anything that we're proposing, other than it has to be addressed like all the requirements have to be addressed going forward.
Thank you, that is all.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Tesser-Dirksen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank our presenter for the great presentation. I do have a general question about the impact on the natural heritage system. Going back to the grading rubric you had, where you had your options and then your preferred option, I noticed all of them scored kind of badly as far as impacting the natural heritage system. One of the other options that is not the preferred one scored slightly higher. Could you just comment on what kind of impacts we'd be looking at? Thanks.
Sure, and through you, Mr. Chair, certainly, Councillor, we, when you look at the evaluation criteria that were related to that, because we're fully implementing the region's natural heritage system, we're not proposing a natural heritage system, we're not creating one, and certainly all the requirements of your official plan and the region's official plan continue to prevail over development adjacent to the natural heritage system in terms of protection. In our team's mind, the only thing that was left then to consider were how many crossings of roads that we were proposing essentially over the natural heritage system, and clearly we're looking to support an option that minimized those crossings, because that would be the primary intersect point and impact of the secondary plan and its delivery without, once the NHS was being provided in the first place and protected in the first place, which we're accepting as a given coming into this and manifesting in. So our evaluation may look severe in some ways, but it was only really weighted towards how many crossings there were. And our high-level assessment of where those crossings were, both in terms of the amount and mitigating the impact. If it was crossing a bigger water course, obviously rather not do that. But if it was crossing something like an ephemeral stream, certainly there's environmental work that has to proceed. Certainly Mr. Sears and our team looked at that as part of Phase 1-2 EA. Phase 3 and 4 of the environmental assessment process is the next part of the environmental assessment that would unfold. that would occur as part of the tertiary plans that the landowners would lead in cooperation with the town staff. It's especially in phase 3 where the alternatives and actual routing is finally determined and looked at. Phase 1 and 2 is more of the need and the requirement for the roads and the amount of connections, although we've already have proposed network because that's what's in the secondary plan. It can be refined, and certainly through phase 3 that is going to be looked at again critically. So we think the preferred option delivers a road network that's as much of a grid and as much as connected as can be, while minimizing how many crossings we have to do over the NHS.
Thank you. That actually segues nicely into another question I have with respect to the connectivity, because, you know, on paper, it really looks like it's quite an isolated chunk of land with that natural heritage system running through it, and there's a water course. So and this is maybe more of a comment than a question, but I guess what I'm hearing from you is that the balance of connecting this area to, I mean, existing Milton and maybe even the Britannia secondary plan is that we have to have access across the natural heritage system by way of roadways and access points like that.
Just to clarify, we're not proposing any new roadways over the Greenbelt area. Certainly, we identified in looking at the plan and its overall connectivity, there is a potential not expressed in this plan and not required for this plan to work of Louis Saint Laurent extending potentially in the future. We have placed the collector road middle part of the plan to facilitate that connection if the town ever saw the need to or thought that had to happen. Our transportation work has confirmed it is not required for this plan to function and connectivity to work, that the existing connectivity provided through Derry and Britannia and obviously the highway system and also the transit system that will be extended provide sufficient vehicular and transit connectivity. And certainly I would say that the active transportation network is designed to connect back into the larger trail network. The feasibility of that trail system has to be fully vetted through the next process, although we're showing what we think needs to happen to have a fully connected trail system that would have those larger connections. But generally speaking, the connectivity is going to be achieved through the existing road system, east and west. I think it'll be enhanced somewhat in terms of what you're expressing, the isolation of it as the Britannia secondary plan is planned and comes along as well. That provides more of that more linear connectivity, but there is a large green belt swath that is populated predominantly with farm fields and golf course and other uses that exist and will exist in the foreseeable future as a natural separator between this area and much of the rest of the town and the residents in it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor. Do you have any final brief comments you wish to make before I entertain comments from the public?
The only thing I would like to do, and I kind of forgot to do it at the beginning, is to very much thank your staff, Ms. Koopmans, Ms. Hogan, and Megan, of course, have been essential through this. We worked intensively, I would say, and extensively together, and it's been a wonderful collaboration. And certainly as well, I really appreciate to date, and what we're going to hear tonight, but the innovative format that your staff pioneered for the public consultation that you mentioned, Councillor. I had my doubts, I'll say, about doing a planning fair, and I think it's one of the best innovations I've seen in a long time. It worked very well. We had a lot of people there. Some of the councillors were there. And we got a lot of great input and great discussion going and a lot of directed and down-to-earth sort of discussions on what had to happen in these plans. And certainly the landowners and their consultants have been very active, and that's always, and very cooperative and very helpful. That was especially in context, I recall in the summer, of trying to put forward initial business case material to Metrolinx on the GO station and align the planning of what we were doing in Egerton with that aspiration and that getting to that achievement. And they were very helpful in that regard as well. So I thank everyone for their contributions.
Thank you. So this is the public part of the comment on the official plan amendments. As I indicated earlier, Adgerton and Trafalgar are being considered together. I do have two people who have formally registered to appear before council to offer their thoughts. I'll entertain their commentaries first and then the general public. So I have Paul Lowes. Is he in the audience? Paul, if you could identify your full name and your full address to the clerk, that would be appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Mr. Chairman. My name is Paul Lowes. I'm a principal with SGL Planning and Design at 1547 Bloor Street West in Toronto. And good evening to the committee, good evening to the public. We represent the Trafalgar Landowners Group, and they're a group of 4 major landowners who are currently active with development in your municipality. I'd like to commend staff and your consultants. There's been a tremendous amount of work done in a very short period of time, and I'd like to commend them for that. There's also a large number of studies, background studies, that accompany the secondary plan, and we're still reviewing those. And as Mr. Corey indicated, there's still a transportation study to be submitted. We're still waiting for the phase 4 of the subwatershed study. So we may have additional comments to provide to the town on those background studies. Generally, though, the landowners are supportive of the land use plan that you find in the Trafalgar secondary plan. I'm only talking about Trafalgar, not Egerton. However, we do have a number of comments and concerns with the text of the secondary plan, particularly the implementation section. And we've had a lengthy meeting with staff, a very good meeting, very good discussion. So we're looking forward to seeing the next draft of the secondary plan, and we look forward to working with your staff and your consultants to finalize that secondary plan and get it back in front of you for adoption. So thank you very much for this time tonight.
And my assumption is that everything that you've put forward is in writing, and the clerk has that, planning staff has that.
We will be providing, we've provided to staff some comments in writing. Staff endeavored to get another version after a meeting from them, another version to us in the coming weeks, and we'll be providing more detail provided there's other comments that haven't been addressed. We'll be providing detailed comments on those.
Are there any questions of Mr. Lowes by council? Thank you, Mr. Lowes.
Thank you very much.
Paul Brown, is he in the audience?
Good evening.
If you could provide your full name and your full address to the clerk, would be appreciated. Thank you.
Paul Brown. I am a principal with CB Land Management. We are land group managers, and we are located at 88 Dufferin Street in Vaughan. Good evening, excuse me. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, committee members, staff, and ladies and gentlemen. My name is Paul Brown, principal of CB Land Management, and we are the managers for the Egerton Landowners Group. We thank you for the opportunity to be before you this evening to address the town's secondary plan initiative for the Egerton secondary plan. Our comments this evening apply to staff report PD 00919, for which I am standing before you, but also to extend to a later item on this evening's agenda, making it possible, staff presentation PD 01119. My colleague Matthew alluded to that report earlier this evening, and that is the provincial policy that was just released last week with regards to significant employment lands throughout the province. Through you, Mr. Chairman, the Egerton Landowners Group supports the town's secondary plan initiative, and we agree with the overall thrust of the secondary plan policies and attendant initiatives, particularly the town's initiative with Metrolinx. There can be no doubt that the realization of a major transit station area called for in Halton's ROPA 38, Milton's OPA 31, and this secondary plan is critical to a critical success factor in the town achieving its employment aspirations and as it works towards a balanced financial position. Mr. Chairman, this public policy planning initiative has been ongoing for over a decade. Since 2006, we have been actively involved with the town and previous council's response to the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. In June 2009, we presented to Council an economic market analysis of the extraordinary locational attributes of the Egerton area. This confluence of transportation capacity, coupled with the town's initiatives with Metrolinx to bring about the realization of the major transit station, will unlock the town's opportunity to address the major office market for the first time with a highly competitive, nationally attractive location. Tonight, we extend our gratitude for Council's determination and staff's considerable expertise in bringing this lengthy public policy process to its present milestone. May we offer another critical success factor of the Egerton mixed-use plan. Flexibility in the secondary plan is required so that the town can adapt to and take advantage of changing economics, office and residential market realities, user requirements, technology, and as we have experienced most recently, changing in provincial legislation. During the next few days, as we receive and review the outstanding studies in support of the secondary plan, we will provide staff with our formal comments to the policies as drafted. Lastly, in January of this year, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing introduced Amendment Number 1 to the Growth Plan. The Egerton secondary plan will be subject to this amendment. Accordingly, we encourage Council to take advantage of the Ministry's offer to have quote-unquote matters in process approved in conformity with the growth plan by inclusion in the changes to the transition regulation OREG 31106. Thank you for this opportunity to stand before you this evening, and I'm available to take any questions you may have.
Thank you for your presentation. My assumption is that you filed that with the clerk and planning staff, or will?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Any questions of Paul by members of council? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Brown. Do any other members of the public wish to step forward and offer their thoughts about either the Egerton or the Trafalgar official plan amendment? Yes, sir. Please come forward. Please identify yourself and where you live to the clerk. Thank you.
Frank Varga. I'm Varga Family Farm Partnership. I've got a farm on the 8th line. And we farm about 600 acres in Halton County. My one question is something that's ongoing. When Region initiated their rope at 38 back, I've got a letter here in April 2010 I submitted to the town and the region. I always thought their mapping was rather weak and inadequate. I know they had a lot of work to do and they just had to get something out there. So they got rope at 38 mapping out on the NHS. A lot of it, I thought, especially with my property, was inaccurate. I asked them to walk the land, the council, or the town of Milton walked the land. Nobody really did. Didn't expect it. And I had a discussion with Ron Glenn, who was the planner at the time. Basically, he said, don't worry about it when the time comes for development, then we'll groundproof it. Well, I think your environmental people have done that. They've done a good job. I've seen a little bit of the work. It seems adequate. And I'm just wondering if when I look at the map, it just shows ROPA 38 NHS as it was 10 years ago. Or when your consultants come in with refinements to the NHS, will that trump the region, or is the region going to say, this is the plan, we don't want to hear about it? Because, for instance, my property there, when I first had it, we were doing 80 bushels an acre on corn. Now we're doing 200 bushels because I'm a farmer, I farm the land, and everything's done according to best practices, and we've got things going. So when I look there, I see 100 acres of cornfield. When the region looks there, they see, 20 acres of, I don't know, swamp and forest, but it's not there. Hasn't been there for 15 years. So, I mean, I'm just wondering what's going to happen. When your studies come in, which I will respect, and they may differ with the region, but the region says, this is our plan. And I'm looking at a lot of the planning work you've done, which is great, but you've got linkages, you've got this, you've got that. It's complicated. Which comes first? I mean, you need a good plan. And if you're basing everything on ROPA 38 as is, as opposed to what you find, I'm just a little worried or confused. Can anybody help me?
Yes, so I'm going to have Barb respond to your question.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, in support of the secondary planning program, the town has undertaken through its consulting team extensive sub-watershed work. As I think we heard earlier this evening, Phase 4 of the sub-watershed work will be forthcoming shortly. In addition to that, we've also commenced the Master Environmental Servicing Plan, and that involves additional field work, so there has been extensive ground truthing done by the town's team. Both the region and the Conservation Authority staff have been extensively involved in both these programs, and the policy framework put forward, as Mr. Corey articulated earlier this evening, does contain policies that speak to the regional policy framework in ROPA 38 as to how refinements of the natural heritage system can be identified and implemented. In the town's case, those will occur through our tertiary planning program.
Okay, may I just, what I'm hearing is that the region will listen to the town's input on the environmental and modify their ROPA 38 mapping? Because right now the mapping you have is ROPA 38.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the region won't necessarily modify the ROPA 38 mapping. However, the region is the approval authority of our secondary plan, and the regional policies speak to refinements, so that in approving the town's secondary plan, effectively, that would modify ROPA 38. It just really puts into the mapping what is spoken to in the regional policy framework.
Okay, I'm not sure I understand.
Any further clarification required? This is probably not the best place to sort of get into deep detail on that. Mr. Varga, staff have taken down your question. Okay. Barb understands what you are asking, and as part of the process, we will provide a very detailed written response in the report to your question. If you've got anything further you want to dig into, I would suggest that send an email or a letter to the clerk. He'll get it to the planner, and if you guys need to, move offline to have the conversation, then it's probably not a bad idea, but it will be formally responded to. Is there anything else that you wish to raise as part of your questions?
That's pretty well it. The other things are minor. Yeah, so as long as the region listens to the town, that would be novel. Thank you.
Not going to argue with you there. Thank you. Actually, Mr. Varga, council may have some questions of you. I didn't ask, so that's okay. It's my fault. Do any members of council have a question of the delegate? You can sit down now. Are there any members of the public for a second time who wish to step forward and offer any questions or comments? Yes, please. And please identify who you are and your address. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Renee Carlson. I'm at 374 Sumner Avenue, Oakville, Ontario. I have a question. First of all, I wanted to thank the council and members of the town staff for proposing the secondary plan, which is, I think, fabulous, and I think it's really, really good. My question is, unlike my predecessor, I am a very small landowner, and the plan basically bulldozes my land and does not allow me to build anything, which I was planning to build a building with 24 units. However, a collector road goes through the middle of my land, and I'll be able to build nothing at all. And the land will have to be non-usable whatsoever. It's located right on Trafalgar Road, right in the neighborhood node. It's a very valuable location, but because of the location of the proposed location of the collector road, it will not be able to be used. It will have to be a weedy patch forever. So my question is, how can is there any way I could possibly not be ignored and somehow be contacted before this plan goes forward?
Okay, Barb or Paul?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the transportation work in support of the secondary plan will be presented to the town in short order, and we can look at the alignment of the collector roads. However, more importantly, that is likely to be refined further through the tertiary plan process that will be upcoming, and then subsequently through individual plans of subdivision. So there's a lot more detail to come forward with respect to the alignment of collector roads.
Any further questions or comments based on what you've heard?
I would like to be contacted and not ignored.
Yeah, that will happen. It's possible that the clerk may have had difficulty with your name and address, and so if you don't mind writing it down and passing it on to either Paul or Barb before you leave, or register if you haven't registered already, that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Your Worship.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe I received this today, and I believe it's from the deputation, Mrs. Carlson, right?
Yes, it is.
So it was put on council's desk just this evening, so she is on record, and I know that I haven't had a chance yet to acknowledge, because just the receipt of it today, so she already is on record to that end, so it's on your desk this evening.
Perfect. Thank you, Your Worship. Any final comments?
No, thank you.
Okay, before you leave, are there any questions of the delegate? Seeing none, you're free to go.
Thank you.
Third and final time, is there anybody who wishes to offer? Yes, sir. Please step forward.
Hello, good evening, Mr. Chairman and fellow councillors. My name is Nick Bursick. I have a farm on 5414 8th line. It's south of Britannia and west of the 8th line. My question to you, or to the consultant, is when I was looking at this secondary plan, why is there a jog after Britannia, or just before Britannia, when you go south? If you're doing a development, when you want to do the whole block, I understand that Trafalgar is going to be a major corridor. I think the consultant was saying that 36,000 people are planned to be moving to this area. If you're going to be building on 8th line, wouldn't you rather extend 8th line all the way down your development and do it as a block? My concern is with the traffic flow. Has there been traffic studies? Are they being done? Is there going to be expansion of the roads on 8th line? If you look at Britannia Road currently, at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the morning, it's a disaster. So those are some of the questions I have.
So those are your questions?
Yeah.
All right, then what I will do is ask Barb or Paul to provide you with a highlighted response based on the questions you've raised. Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, if I understand the location of your property correctly, you are currently located outside of the urban area, so it does not, based on the current policy framework, form part of the secondary planning program proper. However, through another report that will be considered later this evening, the town is looking at comprehensive development and planning for the overall, what we call white belt lands, so all of these lands as we move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions?
No.
Okay. Any questions of the delegate by council? Thank you. Are there any other people who wish to delegate? Please step forward. Please provide your name and address.
Lisa Talon, 6647 Trafalgar Road. I just have a question. At this point in time, is there a more specific timeline for when homes might be expected to be built in Phase 1 of the Trafalgar secondary plan area?
Barb?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the timing right now for the development of these lands in accordance with the regional plan is between 2021 and 2031. The region will be servicing these lands through a future allocation program, the details of which should start to be forthcoming in March, I believe, of this year, where the region will be having a staff report come forward. And once that allocation program advances, we'll have a better appreciation for precise timing. But they cannot be started to develop before 2021.
Okay, great, thank you.
Lisa, any further questions?
No, that's it.
Any questions of the delegate by council? Hearing none, thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody else wish to come forward to offer comments or questions about these official plan amendments? For a second time. For third and final time, is there anybody who wishes to come forward and offer their thoughts about these official plan amendments, Edgerton and Trafalgar? Seeing, I will read out these resolutions, and then I'll have council consider the question. In both cases, they've been moved by Councillor Cluett and Councillor Ali. The first is, be it resolved that report PD 008-19 with respect to town-initiated draft official plan amendment Trafalgar secondary plan be received for information. The second one is, be it resolved that report PD 009-19 with respect to town-initiated draft official plan amendment Edgerton secondary plan be received for information. Council, this is your opportunity to ask any questions or make any comments. At this point, I don't have anybody listed who wishes to speak. All right. Could I have a vote on the motion then? The motions. First, yeah, they have to be voted on separately. So we'll do Edgerton first. All in favor? Raise your hands. Thank you. And Trafalgar. All in favor? Raise your hands. Thank you. Final matter in tonight's public meeting relates to staff report PD 010-19. Sorry. Yes, that's right. Town of Milton supportive housing study policy and zoning amendment implementation. Who is addressing that? Megan, thank you.
Good evening again. I'm also the planner who's been managing the supportive housing study process since we kicked off the study in the summer of 2017. Throughout 2017, a supportive housing study was produced for the town by MHBC Consulting. This study was endorsed by council in January of 2018. At that time, we began to implement the recommendations of the report, starting with the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment. In June of 2018, we held a public engagement night to consult on the proposed amendments prior to beginning the statutory process. A summary of the consultation is attached to the staff report tonight. Tonight is the statutory public meeting of the proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendments. You see two official plan amendments in the package tonight because one is amending the 2008 official plan and one is proposing to amend the town's official plan and conformity exercise OPA 31. We provided the two amendments on both of the plans because the approval of OPA 31 is expected in the near future due to pending appeals. Staff wanted to be clear on how the proposed modifications would be incorporated into each of the plans, depending on which plan is in effect at the time of approval. With that, Dana Anderson from MHBC is going to be walking through the amendments tonight with a quick presentation. Just going to give her 1 sec to...
Yeah, no problem. I understand. Do you want to push the button and just identify yourself, who you're with, and your address, please?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Dana Anderson. I'm a land use planner and partner with MHBC Planning in Burlington, Ontario. I'm waiting for... sorry, there's a presentation. And there are 2 additional slides just for the end. Was this sent before? I think Megan is approaching to.
Either that or we have to warm up the photocopier. Okay, we've found the presentation. Okay, we have your presentation. Thank you. I apologize. That's okay.
I apologize, Mr. Chairman. So I know for brevity, I will try and go through this presentation fairly quickly. This matter has been before Council and Committee before. There's quite a long history to this study, so I'm going to go through some of the key highlights and the steps in terms of the process, and really focus on the amendments that are before you this evening. So this study was undertaken to provide a comprehensive review of the town's current policies and regulations with respect to something we refer to as group homes or supportive housing or special needs housing. And it was intended to provide for recommendations to update various policies and regulations related to those forms of supportive housing to ensure compliance not only with provincial policy but also to align with the region's housing policies. And so the presentation this evening will quickly walk through the work program and the timeline, focus a little bit about on some of the background research and work that we did, the public consultation, and then also speak to you about the proposed amendments that are before you this evening. So just to highlight in terms again of the purpose of the study, Milton had undertaken a study of group homes in 2002, and that was the last time in which these particular forms of housing, supportive housing, were studied. And since that time, there has been a significant change and shift with respect to the legislation and statutes for municipalities, requiring them to re-examine how and where supportive housing models are provided within municipalities. And those include changes, as I mentioned, to planning, the Planning Act itself, provincial policy statement, the ministry's housing policy and action plans, as well as changes to the Ontario Human Rights Code. And so the purpose of the study from Milton was to address this matter and provide an update in relation to supportive housing. Very quickly, in relation to the work program, we commenced the project back in August of 2017. We established a technical group of staff to review and iteratively go through this process. We, at each stage, would meet with that TAC group. We had a series of stakeholder interviews that involved speaking with individuals who own and operate facilities throughout the town, and also with town and regional staff, and also with members of the public. And we had an initial open house in November of 2017. We then compiled all of the background research and key findings with recommendations and came before Council approximately a year ago today. We also then proceeded to draft some amendments with respect to changes to the town's official plan, as well as changes to the zoning bylaw, and we presented those at an additional open house this past summer. Following that, we made some further revisions, and we are here this evening at the statutory public meeting to consider those changes to the town's official plan and zoning bylaw. So very quickly, in terms of some of the background information, just to highlight for you, when we think about supportive housing, we have to remember that there's a spectrum to the way in which supporting housing and its forms can come into place. And that includes everything from absolute homelessness to actual home ownership and market home ownership by individuals who are sharing homes and providing support to each other. And in terms of the background facts and information that we provided in our scan of the supportive housing policy framework, we know that supportive housing can be provided for a full range of individuals, be they those with physical disabilities or developmental disabilities, also youth, persons who are being supported through treatment and rehabilitation, persons who are supported through release from correctional facilities, and also persons who are requiring temporary care, as well as older adults. And in terms of what supportive housing looks like, The traditional form is that which we would think of as a group home or a traditional group home that is located within a single detached dwelling. In fact, that can be within one room of that dwelling. It can be shared accommodation with others in a dwelling, and it can also be independent living in a multiple dwelling form. Our background review was quite extensive. We undertook work to look at changes related to supportive and shared housing with respect to the Ontario Human Rights Code. We looked at provincial policies related to land use. We also looked, as I mentioned, to the ministry's housing policy statement. We also undertook a case study review and focused on a study that had been undertaken by the City of Toronto that looked specifically at group homes and the legislation, and also carried out best practices as to the updates and revisions that other municipalities had undertaken with respect to shared housing. The other important element of our study was to look specifically at Milton's context and demographics. Who are the population that we're serving with supportive housing, and how can we best undertake those changes to accommodate those individuals? The public consultation, again, was quite extensive. It involved meeting and working with a number of individuals who I mentioned own and operate shared and supportive housing facilities. There was an online survey. There were a series of public open houses. We also had an online portal on the town's website to collect information. And as I mentioned, we had iterative and regular meetings with the Technical Advisory Committee. We also had members of Halton Regional staff, both from policy and housing, on the Technical Advisory Committee. And so through our public consultation, what did we hear? We've highlighted here some of the key messages that we heard from the community and from stakeholders. And just some of those include the limitations of the current regulations, some of the discrimination and conflicts within some of the current policies and legislation, the need for increased flexibility for both individuals and owners and operators, as well as the gaps that the current policies and provisions provide in terms of accommodating those individuals who need support in our community. And also, most importantly, eliminating the stigma around group homes and the terminology around group homes specific to particular individuals, removing that from the policy and the regulatory framework. So we came forward with our background report and recommendations to Council, as I mentioned, approximately a year ago. And the key highlights from that presentation were to revise the current definitions to provide for a range of supporting housing forms. And this was intended to provide some flexibility, but also align with provincial policy and also align with the region's housing policies and definitions for supportive and shared housing. We also looked to revise some of the regulations in the rural and urban zoning bylaws to allow more supportive housing forms in all residential land use designations subject to updated regulations. So we put those recommendations before Council, and as I mentioned, there was direction to endorse the recommendations of the report and to proceed with the additional public open house. We held that in June of this year, and then we proceeded to make some additional changes based on some of the comments we received, which I believe is summarized as part of the staff report, and come before you this evening with the proposed final draft amendments. So a few highlights. These are predominantly from the June open house, the changes that we're still recommending. Again, a new defined term. Instead of referring to special needs housing, group home 1 or 2, or correctional group home, we're moving towards a consolidated definition of shared housing. And that definition provides for a living arrangement which is licensed or regulated under a provincial or a federal statute, and where that operation is subject to provincial or federal oversight. And that definition also indicates where up to 10 individuals, exclusive of staff or supportive help, are provided in shared accommodation as what we refer to as a single housekeeping unit. And that would be within a dwelling unit and also be provided with support within that dwelling unit. So that definition is very similar to that which you see within regional policy and in provincial housing policy. The other change to the official plan and the zoning bylaw is to remove the separation distance that used to be in place, and that was only allowing shared housing facilities within a certain distance of each other. And again, through our review of both the best practice research and the case studies, those types of separation regulations in bylaws have been deemed to be discriminatory. We also noted that shared housing should be supported in both the urban and rural areas, subject to all regulations, and again, that any form of supporting housing in excess of 10 persons, exclusive of staff, would constitute more of an institutional use than it would a residential use or supportive housing for that purpose. And similarly, as I mentioned with the zoning bylaw, we are recommending changes which streamline and implement the changes to the official plan. Again, modifying and revising those definitions for shared housing and removing those separation distances, harmonizing the maximum number of individuals that would constitute shared housing, allowing shared housing in a range of dwelling types, not just single detached dwelling types, and also addressing some of the technical requirements and the regulations based on the new definition. So this is the definition that was proposed in June. Those additional slides would show you the one or two changes that we've made to this, which is really to indicate that this is to be licensed or regulated under provincial or federal statute, and also operated subject to that provincial or federal oversight. And so we had feedback on those initial proposals back in June, questions about what approval or regulation referred to. There was questions about some of the areas where we were not permitting these uses, which were in the Greenland areas of the plan. Some had concerns that the definition was limiting by adding in a provincial or federal oversight or requirement. Others asked where the 10 persons came from. Through the background research, as I noted, we found that the 10 persons as a maximum cap, rather than having a minimum with no maximum, was what was used as best practice in the majority of municipalities that we looked at. Many supported the definition. They felt it was important to ensure a level of control and oversight to protect those most vulnerable within our community. They asked about how specific types of shared or supportive housing would work within the framework, and we went through those. They also asked in relation to what type of supervision or support would be required. And again, this is where we've implemented the provincial and federal oversight through licensing or regulation, which, depending on the nature of the supportive housing, would have a level of support that would be required depending on the needs of the individual. And so those amendments that are put before you as updated are proposing, as I mentioned, to provide for the new definition of shared housing. And we have put forward an amendment to both the existing official plan and, as I think Megan indicated, to OPA 31 out of an abundance of caution. And we're also recommending changes to both the rural and the urban zoning bylaws to now provide for the shared housing form through the municipality in accordance with the new regulations. So that was very quick to go through a lot of information that has a lot of background to it. I'd be happy to answer any questions. We are here at the statutory public meeting. We're here to respond to your questions or comments and also listen to any members of the public who may have input into this important housing study and implementation. So with that, I turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your presentation. Megan, do you have any clarifying comments you wish to make before I entertain questions from members of council? No? All right, I have two now. Councillor Malbouf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation and the intensive work you've put into this, but I do have a couple of questions. The first one is the removal of the 500-meter separation. Is there any concern, or did you consider that this could end up in a concentration of these group homes or supportive housing in a certain area and end up ghettoizing that area?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, through our work, we have found that in many cases the 500-meter separation was arbitrary at best. There was no research to suggest that a particular separation area between supportive or shared housing implies any function other than to maintain a distance for those individuals, where in fact there may be particular locations that provide for an additional level of support, such as being proximate to transit. And I don't think, in terms of the impact for these homes, the majority of them are intended to function just as a family would function as a housekeeping unit with the level of support. So you would not see the level of, as I would say, institutionalization for these uses based on the regulations we're putting in place.
My next question is increasing the maximum to 10 residents. Who would be regulating, the conditions associated with the number of people living there? I mean, number of bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage. Who would be controlling that?
Thank you, through Mr. Chairman. So the increase to the maximum, there actually isn't currently a maximum. So we're actually imposing a maximum. And that's, again, based on our best practice research that we see the majority of municipalities using a maximum where that 10 unit usually relates to some type of scale for the number of individuals. The way in which the particular housing support or supportive housing is provided is in relation to that provincial or federal statute. So if it is as an example, a home that is providing care for youth in a particular circumstance, whether it's health-related or developmental health-related issues, there would be oversight through the provincial statutes from the Ministry of Child and Youth Services that would regulate the number of support individuals. They would have their own regulation in relation to the number of children that can be accommodated with ratios for support staff. And so through our work, it was our opinion that that type of oversight and regulation should be in accordance with the provincial or the federal statutes, because those are the ones that are identifying the level of care, the required care to provide for that supportive housing function. And so we have deferred to them, and again, they vary, so the maximum of 10 is provided for based on the best practice research. But it is through those individual oversights and licenses and regulations that would provide for that number.
Thank you. And my final question is, what obligation do we have as a municipality to notify or to basically give notice to the area residents that an application has been brought forward?
So with respect to, through you, Mr. Chairman, with respect to notification, the supportive or the shared housing unit would be required to comply with all other zoning bylaw regulations for the functioning of a detached dwelling in accordance with building code standards, fire standards, and in addition to that, all of the regulations from the oversight body, whether that's federal or provincial, based on their particular license or statute. There would be no notification per se required to indicate that a particular home was operating. In fact, in many cases for supportive housing for women that are seeking refuge, there's actually a level of confidentiality not to provide for that public disclosure of where those locations are. So we're moving away from a system in which these individuals were subject to that type of notification to one in which they have safe and supportive housing that's provided in the municipality through this form of change to the regulation. So the public, if it's operating in accordance with the zoning bylaws and all other requirements, would not provide a notification unless there was a requirement for some other change to the zoning.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Chester-Dirksen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first comment would be with respect to the removal of the categorizations and the definitions and kind of just making a rather broad definition of shared housing. And what precisely was the logic behind that? Is it primarily to remove stigma from particular groups, or you're nodding your head? Yeah, I'll let you answer. Through you, Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. Is primarily to remove what we cannot do in zoning regulation, and that is zone based on the individuals who are residing in a particular
form of housing. And that has been something that has been upheld through the courts and through the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal based on discrimination through zoning. And so that is one of the reasons we have removed those particular types and forms of housing which delineate the type of individuals that are living in the home.
Thank you. I fully respect the fact that we have to comply with the Ontario Human Rights Code and with legislation. I guess my concern is that there has to be some balance for existing residents who may deem that they should have notification of certain types of housing. My primary concern, not just for residents in the area, but also for the people who would be living in the shared housing, is in the category of medical rehabilitation, drug rehabilitation. It's a medical function. We'd have to look at access for emergency vehicles and that sort of thing, and what types of neighborhoods would that be permitted. And of course, that would have an impact on residents, both urban and rural. So I'll allow you to comment on that as well. Thanks.
So again, depending, through you, Mr. Chairman, depending on the type of care that would be provided and the type of support, most of these individuals, I would say in this form of shared housing that we're providing for, are operating as a housekeeping unit. So they are, in many cases, living independently, but they have some supervision and some support. Again, depending on the provincial statute or the federal statute, there would be requirements in place for the services that have to be provided or the support that has to be provided in that ratio, access to other services, security. All of those things would be addressed through the provincial and federal regulations as opposed to relying on some form of licensing or oversight by the municipality. That's in place through the requirement that any of these facilities have that level of government oversight and regulation. So some of those concerns are addressed through the requirements of the provincial or the federal body to ensure that it's not only safe for the individuals, but it's also maintains that safety within the community.
Thank you. Just two more questions. So with respect to the municipalities that you identified as comparators, I mean, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find residents in Milton who would think that Toronto, Hamilton, London, Waterloo, Cambridge would be suitable comparisons. Particularly, I know I have an office in Cambridge, and we're down the street from a large, will be, I guess, a shared housing facility, and it is completely inappropriate for that particular area. So both for the residents of the home and for the people in the area. My concern is that we could end up with something in an inappropriate area in Milton, and I'm wondering what kind of precautions or what kind of planning would be undertaken to ensure that we don't end up with these places in inappropriate locations for everybody.
Thank you for your question. Through Mr. Chairman. So one of the things we've also recommended, and this was part of our report, is as much as we have a number of policies and regulations before you, those are based on the limitations that we have in the land use planning framework. We have suggested that these provisions and policies be reviewed annually. We have suggested that there be a level of education with staff and resourcing. We've also suggested that there be a registry, and there's a number of reasons for that, and that is to ensure that your building officials, your bylaw enforcement, fire, and other protective services are aware of the locations of these facilities within the municipality to be able to respond accordingly and also know where those locations are. So there's some additional elements to these recommendations that support some of those concerns for information.
Thank you. Oh, Barb wants to speak. Sorry.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, in addition to the comments that Ms. Anderson has put forward, part of the study is looking at the continuum of supportive housing arrangements from single residential housekeeping units to more institutionalized care, and I think that goes a long way. I'm sorry, I'm presuming you're referring to Bridges. So that it would be in the spectrum of the kinds of housing forms that we're talking about. That would be more institutionalized care, and it would be beyond the scope of a single housekeeping unit.
Thank you. And just one more question. And you kind of touched on it. You mentioned a registration program. And I just see in your report here, the memo, that at item number 3, you actually have considering implementing a registration program in place of the existing licensing system. So again, could you comment on the benefits of having the registration system as opposed to the licensing system?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chairman. The intention of moving away from the requirements for municipal licensing is to put that emphasis on the provincial and the federal statutes and oversight, so that all the regulations related to the type of supportive or shared housing is through those requirements and licensing and approval and supervision requirements. The need for maintaining the registration is to ensure that the municipality continues to have that inventory and can regularly update that and then review with the policies to look at any particular issues that may arise, and that they're aware of where they are. I think when we started the study, there are a number of locations that are operating without any understanding of the type of programs that they're running, the oversight that they're providing, or whether or not they would meet this current standard. So it also allows bylaw enforcement to determine if, based on these new zoning regulations and policies, these particular operations are in accordance with the requirements and the law.
Thanks for answering all my questions. That's all.
Thanks, Councillor. Before I let you go, are there any final brief comments you wish to make?
No, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for those questions. I know this is a considerable amount of information, and I look forward to hearing other comments from the community.
Thank you. So this is the public's opportunity. Is there anybody in the audience who wishes to step forward and make any comments or ask any questions with respect to this amendment? Yes, sir, please come forward. If you would identify yourself to the clerk by name and your address before you begin your presentation, that would be helpful.
Hi, my name is George Morphopoulos. I'm from 7651 Millborough Line here in Milton, and I'm representing my organization, which is a drug rehab, and associated our licensing group, which is the Association for Better Living and Education, and the Social Betterment Property Investment Group. So I've studied the report, and we've been presenting to council and to staff for a number of years now regarding licensing or operating drug rehab in Milton. We have a large facility, we have it set up, and I'd like to just offer a few comments on the report. First of all, I think it's a very good report, and I'd like to commend council and the consultants for the work done on it so far. But I don't think it goes quite far enough. And I'd like to raise just a couple of points on that. These points have all been discussed with staff and with the consultants as well, and they're actually a matter of in front of the Human Rights Tribunal right now. So I won't go into the legalities of it, but I just wanted to raise a couple of points. First of all, you know, in dealing with people with disabilities, their right to reside anywhere in the municipality should be, according to in the zone, offered to us by the Human Rights Tribunal, it should be as of right. It shouldn't be something that's legislated, regulated, licensed, or overseen in any particular way. It's the right. We're Canadians, so you don't get to choose who your neighbors are. That the fact that people living in a home are disabled for whatever reason, as a code-identified group, the code prohibits discrimination under any standards, under any means. So that's a human rights issue, and as I say, we've offered a complaint to the Human Rights Commission, and they're hearing that over the next few days, so we'll be able to report back on that. The main point of contention that I have with as far as the report not going quite far enough, is that it restricts the definition to where a program has supervision by the province or by the federal government under any general or specialized act. And basically what that tells us is that only those activities that are regulated are being permitted in the town of Milton. Now, you know, we're living in Ontario, living across Canada. There's been many, many, many groups that have offered help to people that aren't federally regulated or funded or, you know, established in that way at all. And it's been part of our tradition in this country that such help is broadly needed. You know, right now we have 2,800 beds, for example, for people with addictions. Only 1,100 of the 2,800 are publicly funded and regulated. The vast majority are not. So we're saying, as a result of the interpretation of the definition for the shared housing, is that they must be government funded, they must be government regulated. The Department of Health, in its wisdom, has decided not to regulate drug rehabs. It's a catch-22. The plan is calling for where the activity would have to be regulated, but there's no provision made for what if there's no such regulation? What if there's no such law? Basically, we're being told, no, you can't operate in this city. You can't offer rehabilitation services because you're not publicly funded, because you're not publicly supervised. And I don't think that's going far enough in allowing the leeway for such activity to, you know, to be of service. There's many, many organizations that offer service that's in the public good that are not government funded or government regulated. And drug rehab happens to be a very large part of that. I don't want to beat this to death, but you know, it's a particular point, and there is the very valid concern that has been expressed by quite a number of people where there should be some oversight, there should be some form of comfort to the community and to the staff, really, that people are being well cared for and properly treated and so on. And I acknowledge that. But there's a difference between having that being a government supervised activity, or in this case, the Department of Health has chosen not to provide that regulation, but has said instead it should be through an accreditation agency. So the Department of Health has authorized an organization called CARF, which is Center for Addiction, that offers accreditation to all, you know, the majority of drug rehabs across the country. And that is a form of supervision, much more so, in fact, than through the local LIN, which would basically is a once-a-year audit, as opposed to CARF, which is a very in-depth review of practices and everything else. So I had one last little point here on this, and that's where, you know, we talked about the consultants and the entire process, looking at best practices and looking at the documents in the zone from the tribunal and so on. And where Cambridge, for example, has put in the additional wording of it shall be approved and licensed where required by the province or other appropriate authorities. So if you just add that line, that whole issue goes away, where it's required. But if you're asking for it to be required where it's not even possible, that's a catch-22, and nobody can meet that definition. You see what I'm saying? At any rate, those are my comments. I think that it's a very, very good study. I think it makes tremendous strides in the right direction. I don't think it quite goes far enough, and it acts to limit resources for people with disabilities that very, very badly need them. We're in a situation right now where drug addiction, we've had 4,300 deaths in the past year. Compare that to traffic accidents across the country at 2,800. We're almost double people dying from overdoses compared to from car accidents. And there's very, very little in the way of resources being offered. And the Ministry of Health has told us there's very little additional funds available to deal with this rapidly growing crisis. And, you know, there are resources at the private level that can make quite a difference. And I'd like to see that the council acknowledges that in some way and addresses that to make it possible for private organizations to also render this vitally needed aid. Thank you.
Thanks for your presentation. I'm assuming that you filed something with the clerk or the planning department at this point, and if you haven't, please do.
Okay.
At this point, any questions by council of the delegation? Yes, Councillor Tesser-Dirksen.
Thanks very much, and thank you very much for your thoughtful presentation. I'd just like you to maybe to speak a little bit more about the accreditation that you mentioned. I think I might have missed, just if you can walk a dummy through the process.
Sure. The Council for Addictions is an accreditation organization that's been recognized by the province of Ontario as a bona fide accreditation agency for drug addiction specifically. And we are registered with them, whereas the province itself says they don't want any part of doing the accreditation. They're completely out of that. So there is no way to get accredited by the province as a drug addiction facility. You have to go through one of the private accreditation agencies, and the largest in North America right now is CARF, who are the people that we're registered with. There are several other smaller ones, but CARF is the main one, and they accredit hospitals and private clinics and all sorts of activities.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Councillor. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public who wish to address this amendment? Yes, sir. Please come forward. State your name and address.
My name is Tom Weinstein. I live at 7553 Millboro Line. And I have a question with regards to the shared housing now, which used to be called group homes. And they were called group homes because they were homes for people where they stayed. And I think that's still the spirit of the law or spirit of the rule or the guideline that we're talking about here. So my question is, how long do we expect a person to stay in a group home? This is a home where people would stay for weeks or months or years. Is there a sort of a timeline for how long people stay in a group home?
Barb, any ideas on that one?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, there is no timeline specified in the proposed definition. It would depend on the type of supportive living arrangement required by the individual.
Thank you. And my second comment is that it was mentioned that a shared home has to be federally or provincially supervised. And I think that's a good thing, because the reason that the province or the federal government supervises it is because they have standards, they have medical standards, scientific standards that they follow. And that's what makes our medical system so good, in that they follow these processes. And I think it's important that we continue to do that. And I feel that if we make exceptions to the definition, I think the definition is very good. If we start making exceptions to the definition or loopholes to it, then we'll have all kinds of special interest groups saying that they're an exception or they're an exception, and that we should change the rules or tweak the rules just a little bit. So I believe that the definition is good as it stands. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have you filed your comments with the clerk or planning? If you haven't, please do.
I have not done this. This was simply a reflection of the previous speaker.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions of the delegate? Thank you, sir. Is there anybody else who wishes to address council on this matter? For a second time, is there anybody who wishes to address council on this matter? For a third and final time, is there anybody who wishes to address council on this matter? Seeing none, I'm going to read the resolution and then invite council to ask any questions or make any comments. So it has been moved by Councillor Cluett, seconded by Councillor Ali. Be it resolved that report PD 010-19 with respect to town-initiated draft official plan and zoning bylaw amendments, supportive housing, be received for information. Any questions or comments by members of council before we hold the vote? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. The next item on the agenda is presentations, delegations, and staff report PD 011-19. The presentation is going to be made by Jill Hogan, our Director of Planning Policy and Urban Design. Jill?
Good evening, members of council, members of the public, and town staff. I was just introduced. For those of you that don't know me, I am Jill Hogan. I work with the planning department here at the town. We know that there's been a lot of changes coming out of the province since the recent election, and it's really hard to keep up with some of these changes. And municipalities are put in a position to respond very quickly to proposed changes. What I'm here to talk to you about this evening is proposed changes to the provincial growth plan and how the town of Milton can position these changes to position ourselves for strategic growth and for economic development. So there are considerable changes being proposed to the provincial growth plan. The changes provide new options for realizing Milton's future urban structure. And how this is being done is through enhanced local decision-making. And this is really key, and I'm going to repeat this: enhanced local decision-making. Now, the purpose of these changes is to increase the available housing supply, it's to streamline transit growth, attract investment, and to foster job creation. Now, to support more local decision-making, it is critically important that Milton express broad support in principle to Growth Plan Amendment Number 1 and articulate any Milton-specific information in advance of the commenting deadline, which has been set for the end of this month. Council endorsement of the report before you this evening would facilitate this. So how could the proposed growth plan changes position the town's strategy for growth and economic development, and what needs to happen to make it possible? Through various council endorsements, strategic growth initiatives have been identified, including the Meritor lands, the Egerton Secondary Plan, the Milton Education Village, Britannia West lands, future employment lands, our White Belt lands, and lands located within the vicinity of Bronte and Maine. Now, at a very high level, the proposed changes to the growth plan would provide more flexibility in terms of urban boundary expansions, employment land conversions. It would provide the ability to designate new employment areas, delineate major transit station areas, and the province is also looking at employment areas from a provincial significance perspective, and they're also looking to reduce greenfield density targets. So the next set of slides that I'll be presenting to you, they directly correlate with the recommendations in the report. What the province has done is they have really taken a broad brush approach to mapping across the province, and they've been very transparent about this. And what they're doing is seeking local intelligence. They're reaching out to the municipalities. They want to make sure that they're getting this mapping right. Staff have identified some corrections that are required, but have also indicated where the proposed changes actually facilitate Milton's future urban structure. Now, the approach to employment planning as it's currently legislated in the provincial growth plan, it's somewhat archaic, to be frank. It doesn't provide opportunities for people to live and work in close proximity, and this is really, really critical. As it stands right now, something that is called a municipal comprehensive review is required. And this is required anytime a municipality is looking to increase its urban boundary, or convert existing employment lands. This is really a lengthy process, and it's undertaken at the regional level. It's really important to understand that this process does not allow for local decision-making. The town of Milton were actually on record formally requesting that the province consider options to provide more flexibility and to reduce timelines in the provincial planning process. And what is being proposed by the province simply would achieve this. So what does this mean for a site like Meritor? Well, Meritor site, it's located very close to the intersection of Steeles and Martin Street. It's near our urban core, and we know that there's opportunity here in the very near future for the redevelopment of this site as a mixed-use employment community. What the proposed changes to the growth plan allow is for the employment adaptation of this site, and it allows this to occur in advance of a regional process. To make this possible, though, we do require a mapping correction to remove this site from the list of provincially significant employment zones, and this is reflected in the report before you this evening. The Egerton secondary plan, you all should be fairly well versed after the lengthy presentation this evening, but that's another strategic initiative that has been identified. And as we discussed earlier, the key to this entire community is landing that future GO station. We at the town, we've been getting a lot of traction with Metrolinx, and they have actually committed to undertaking a preliminary business case for the new station. What we're looking to achieve here, as Matthew explained earlier, is a fully integrative, transit-supported, higher-density, mixed-use, complete community. What the proposed changes to the growth plan will do will allow us to undertake a very small urban boundary expansion to bring in the CP lands, which are currently orphaned from the plan. It will allow us to designate lands for mixed-use development. It would also allow us to delineate a major transit station area. And the key to this, though, is that all of this could happen in advance of a lengthy regional process. One thing that we do need to clearly articulate to the province, though, is that we require a mapping correction to only include the lands north of the hydro corridor as provincially significant employment. Now, the Milton Education Village, very similar to Egerton, we're looking to achieve a complete mixed-use employment community. We're looking to attract knowledge-based employment and residential uses to this area. We all know this is the future home of Laurier University. Growth Plan Amendment number 1 is very encouraging to the Milton Education Village. It allows us to achieve our vision without having to go through any extensive regional process. So it's a real positive thing in the context of the Milton Education Village. Britannia Westlands. Our future urban structure currently envisions these lands to be developed for lower density residential uses in the future. What we do need, though, from the province at this time is a mapping correction. And I don't know if this laser works. The northern portion of the Britannia Westlands is incorrectly being shown as a provincially significant employment land, and we need to get that fixed. So that is also articulated in the recommendations before you this evening. Future employment lands. These play a very critical role in our future urban structure, and the lands that the town has identified for future employment growth is coincident with what the province is proposing as provincially significant employment lands. While we heard this evening that in the Egerton area, we're looking for that mixed-use type of employment as well. We're looking for that at the MEV. But there also is a need here in the town of Milton to support those more land-intensive type employment uses. And these uses are very appropriately located along the 407 highway corridor, and the provincially significant employment zone would facilitate this. What's really key, though, to the future employment lands is that we can make changes in advance of the region's lengthy process. Another interesting piece of this as well is with regard to Rattlesnake Point Golf Course. The proposed changes to the growth plan would allow development potentially to be accelerated in this area, and what this could do is potentially support the Canadian Open coming to Milton. So you've heard a little bit about the White Belt lands this evening. What the proposed changes to the growth plan allow is for a municipality to designate White Belt lands, again, in advance of a regional process. What the report before you this evening is requesting, though, is that the minister consider expansions in excess of 40 hectares where it's appropriate. And finally, lands at Bronte and Maine. What the proposed growth plan changes are doing here is really releasing the handcuffs that are on these lands right now. What is envisioned in the proposed growth plan is that this area could be developed for a mix of uses, and that's very encouraging as this is consistent with our future urban structure. Now, I want to leave you with some final thoughts. The recommendations to the minister, as outlined in the report before you, what they will do is they will add certainty to Milton's future urban structure, and they will provide a mechanism for local decision-making without the timing hindrance of a lengthy regional process. It's really critically important, though, that Milton express broad support in principle and articulate any Milton-specific information in advance of the commenting deadline of February 28th. And just in closing, I just want to reiterate that the proposed changes to the growth plan will really help the town of Milton realize its ultimate council-endorsed urban structure. With that, that concludes my presentation. I'd like to thank you all, and I'm happy to address any questions.
Thanks, Jill. Any questions of council, from council of Jill? All right, seeing none, thank you. This is now the public's opportunity. I have a couple of individuals identified that they wish to address this matter. The first is Jason Sheldon. Is Jason Sheldon in the audience? Jason, if you would identify yourself and your address, that would be helpful to the clerk. Thank you.
My name is Jason Sheldon, Vice President of Land Development with the Remington Group, 7501 Keel Street, Suite 100 in Vaughan, L4K 1Y2. Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of Council. As stated, my name is Jason Sheldon. I'm with the Remington Group, and I'm here before you this evening in support of Report PD 011-19. As background, Remington Group is a multifaceted development and construction company with lands in your Dairy Green Business Park, Britannia West, the future employment areas, as well as the White Belt urban boundary expansion areas. The proposed recommendations by staff, which we support, include one, the facilitation of lower density residential uses in Britannia West as a result of the proposed new minimum greenfield targets for the region. This will allow for a consistent approach to planning for Britannia West as is currently anticipated within Milton's future urban structure. We also support the correction to the province's mapping of the provincially significant employment zones by reflecting the existing boundary between Dairy Green and Britannia West. Ms. Hogan had a very detailed map up there, and I thank you for that. This will ensure it's a very straightforward line correction, but it will show the correct boundaries between the two secondary plan areas. We also support the request to the Minister to proceed with Growth Plan Amendment number 1 in relation to the settlement area urban boundary expansions, and also support considering the urban expansions in excess of 40 hectares to facilitate the inclusion of these lands within the urban boundary. Moving these lands into the urban boundary seamlessly can ensure the most efficient and effective planning to meet Milton's growth needs. And finally, we support the request to the Minister to proceed with Growth Plan Amendment number 1 in relation to Milton's future employment areas, and specifically along the Highway 407 corridors. These are important lands for the town to advance for a full range of employment needs, as Jill indicated in the report, in her presentation. In closing, we support these recommendations by staff to provide to the minister, and we look forward to continue working with the town to meet its planning and growth needs. I'd like to thank town staff and Ms. Hogan for making it possible forward tonight and for consideration. And I'd also like to thank Mr. Chair and members of council for your time this evening. Thank you.
Thanks for your presentation. Are there any questions by council of the delegation? All right, seeing none, thank you.
Thank you very much.
The next delegation I have is Robert Visinton. Is Robert in the audience? If you would identify yourself and identify where you live, thank you.
Oh, I see. My name is Robert Visintin. I live at 36 Queen Mary's Drive in Toronto. I represent Clublink, a landowner affected by the town's strategy for growth and economic development contained in the staff report PD 1119. We thank staff for being assertive and responsive by being one of the first municipalities to comment on Amendment 1 of the growth plan. We support the proposed urban expansion to include Rattlesnake as shown on Appendix 1 of the staff report. We find the current proposal consistent and a refinement of the staff report that was before you, ES 1017, in August of 17. We also find that the proposed expansion will be very helpful in our continuing discussions with Golf Canada to make Rattlesnake Golf Club the long-term home of the Canadian Open. We will continue to work diligently with the town, the region, Golf Canada to make this a reality. On the golf front, I have some good news to share. Rattlesnake will be hosting a U.S. Open sectional qualifying match on June the 3rd of 2019. That date should be marked in your calendars, by the way. The U.S. Open is one of the 4 major championships in the world of golf. It is contested by the USGA, the American equivalent of Golf Canada, as an open championship, meaning anyone can qualify through local and sectional qualifying sites. You can be an amateur or professional, but your handicap has to be 1.4 or less. There are approximately 8,000 golfers accepted to local qualifying events played in the month of May at over 100 locations around the world. Just 500 of those 8,000 make it to advance to the sectional qualifying matches. There are 12 sectional qualifying host sites around the world with 78 spots available for to be able to play in the U.S. Open. 9 of those sites are in the United States, 1 in England, 1 in Japan, and now 1 in Canada. And it will be held at Rattlesnake Point on June 3rd. There's no produced TV broadcast of the sectional qualifying event, but the Golf Channel and other media representatives typically attend and capture footage and the stories of the most popular players and those who move on to the U.S. Open. The players that make it to the sectional qualifying are mostly touring professionals that have not qualified for the U.S. Open yet. The 60 top ranked players make it. The next 18 are qualified based on winning major tournaments, even though they may not be in the top 60. The balance of the field, the 78 spots, is filled by those who advance to the 12 qualifying events. The USGA does not typically open registration and announce sites till early March. At this time, we do not know how many spots will be up for grabs at Rattlesnake, but we won't know the field until the local qualifying matches are complete on May 20th. Both courses will be used for the qualifying event. We anticipate a strong field that many fans, members, media, and special guests will enjoy during the event. We would like to also thank Golf Canada, who work closely with USGA and will conduct this event on behalf of the USGA. This is an important step in showcasing the potential of Rattlesnake Point and the city of Milton for hosting a world-class golf championship. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Sorry to hear there isn't a pro-am.
Well, there is a program too. That's just not unique to the site for now.
Well, if you're looking for a left-handed guy, I'm not Phil Mickelson, but anyway, not even close. Councillor Cluett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You were going over, obviously, this is exciting news, obviously, for Milton and the surrounding area, having this kind of level of golf happening at Rattlesnake. You had mentioned there was a qualifying handicap.
1.4. I will not be in it.
Darn, I'm just done. Okay, sorry about that. Just wanted to make sure. I was almost in, but that's okay.
Thanks, Councillor. Thank you for your presentation. Councillor Malbeuf.
Thank you for your presentation. I checked my date on June the 3rd, my calendar. Unfortunately, most of us are at FCM, so I'm wondering if you could contact USPGA and have them change their date.
It's a hard event to get. It might be easier to change the other one.
Any further questions of the delegation? Seeing none, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So, Council, I'm going to read the resolution. I hope everybody's seated. It could take a while. It's moved by Councillor Cluett, seconded by Councillor Ali. Be it resolved, the report PD 011-19 be received for information, and that Council express broad support in principle to propose Growth Plan Amendment 1 and request the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing to proceed with the following as illustrated in appendices A and B to report PD 011-19. A, that the minister undertake a mapping correction to remove the proposed provincially significant employment zone on the Meritor site to facilitate mixed-use development. B, that the minister undertake a mapping correction to the proposed provincially significant employment zone within the Edgerton secondary plan to only include lands north of the hydro corridor to facilitate mixed-use development. C, that the minister exclude lands within the MEV secondary plan from provincially significant employment zone as currently proposed to allow mixed-use development. D, that the minister proceed with Growth Plan Amendment 1 in relation to the Britannia West secondary plan to allow residential development, and that the minister undertake a mapping correction to remove the provincially significant employment zone along its northern boundary. E, that the minister proceed with Growth Plan Amendment 1 in relation to Milton's future employment areas to support the designation of these lands for employment purposes in advance of the region's municipal comprehensive review. F, that the minister proceed with Growth Plan Amendment 1 in relation to settlement area urban boundary expansions in advance of the region's MCR, with the caveat that expansions in excess of 40 hectares be considered in relation to Milton's white belt lands. And G, that the minister exclude the Bronte Main lands from a provincially significant employment zone as currently proposed to facilitate mixed-use development. And further, the clerk be directed to forward PD-11-19 and its related approved resolutions directly to the Premier of Ontario, provincial ministers of MMAH, MOECP, and MTO, the President and CEO of Metrolinx Go, the Chairman of the Region of Halton, and mayors of Milton's sister municipalities, all local MPPs and MPs, all relevant school boards, as well as directly to the Assistant Deputy Minister of the Ontario Growth Secretariat, Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. Any questions? All in favor, raise your hand. Thank you. Items for consideration. Staff report CORS-011-19, town-affiliated group signage on town road allowances. I'm assuming a member of staff is coming forward to apprise council of the key aspects of that.
Your Worship, I'll just briefly highlight the report. If there are any questions, Mary Beth Mitchell from our Manager of Licensing and Enforcement is here to answer those questions. In August of 2018, Council confirmed enforcement of the road fouling bylaw and as well provided for exemptions to that bylaw for town-affiliated groups, and those were for 1 week before and 48 hours after the event. An updated list of the town-affiliated groups is on your desk tonight, just for information. Other community groups not on that list have been invoiced for removal of their signs last year, and 2 of them are attached to the report, 2 letters. We also have 2 individuals who have requested to speak on this matter tonight, Mr. Chairman. Staff have highlighted 3 options in the report: status quo, add groups or rescind Council Resolution 7118. Mr. Chairman, as I said, Mary Beth is here to answer any questions, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, I have one question from Councillor Malboof at this point. Are there any other councillors with questions? Councillor Malboof.
Okay, thank you. As you know, this sign bylaw and the fouling of our roads by these illegal signs have been a sticking point for not only for me, but for all members of council over the years. We keep passing bylaws, but we don't enforce them. I mean, we see signs everywhere, and they're up there for quite a while. So, and I understand, I read the report, staff has trouble enforcement. You know, what roads are they allowed on, what roads are they not allowed, who's allowed to put up a sign, who's not allowed to put up a sign. So, my one question is, the region has a pretty strict sign bylaw concerning regional roads, and considering the number of regional roads we have in Milton, has staff looked at taking the regional regulations and using those as our rules, as our bylaw and enforcement?
Bill or Mary Beth?
Mr. Chairman, one of the recommendations is to rescind that original motion, which would mean that they would be prohibited, and same status as the regional roads.
If we would vote to rescind the bylaw, we would basically, the regional regulations, we would be using regional as a standard?
Mr. Chairman, not rescind the bylaw, just rescind that original motion. There is a bylaw that doesn't allow the signs, period, so.
Okay, we'll see how that debate goes, but I would just like to see us enforce the bylaw we have. I mean, we can change the bylaws what we want. We all drive around, you see the signs up, they're there for a week. We have our Parks and Rec trucks driving by, we have our operations truck, we have our bylaw people driving by, and the signs stay there. Okay? So I don't know if we really have to become that strict as far as charities, but I would like to see us enforce the bylaw as we have right now. But so that's my concern about the bylaw. But I can see some groups being hurt by rescinding the bylaw, but you know, we have to do something because this road fouling is a serious issue. We hear about it all the time.
Thanks, Councillor. Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know there's two listed delegations that you had mentioned. I think it's only appropriate that we hear from them first because I have some thoughts on it there, and I'm prepared to move a motion or two. And I can assure the council that I don't have any silver bullet to correct it, but the decision that was made by the last council, in my opinion, was rushed and it was not done properly. And we all know why. It's hurt some real great groups here. And Mr. Chairman, just so as you and my colleagues can get their mind bent around it, what I'm going to be suggesting after we hear from the delegation is that those two individual groups that really does help this community, you know, the fine that was levied against them be waived, and that'll be my motion. So hopefully I'll get a seconder. And as well, before we get into any great debate, I'm going to be calling for a recorded vote because this is one, as far as I'm concerned, we have to stand up and be counted because what we did, the previous council, hurt some of those groups. And I'll just single out, like as an example, the Italian Canadian Club that donates so much back. And they're one of the ones that was impacted negatively in a big way there. Trying to get back money to the town, we fine them for doing it. So, you know, something just didn't add up with all this stuff here. So, you know, but that's where I'm coming from. Thank you.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'm going to hear from Councillor Hamid, and then I will hear from the delegations. And I wouldn't mind standing up after a little while, I'll tell you.
I'll yield to the delegation. Thank you.
So we have two people who are registered to address this matter. The first is Nancy Cuddle. And Nancy, if you could identify yourself and your address when you reach the podium. Thank you.
My name is Nancy Cuddle. I live at 332 Woodward Avenue, Milton. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Mayor Krantz, members of council and staff. Thank you for allowing me to address this issue of the impact of the town's road fouling bylaw on the promotion of major community events presented for the enjoyment of all residents of Milton. I think we're actually ready tonight for a change of pace and maybe go back and think about what this town is all about, what makes it tick, what people love about it. We keep growing and growing, but it's important that we hold what's true to our hearts in this town as well. I represent the Fine Arts Society of Milton, and I'm the chair of the FASM Studio Tour. The studio tour is a free, self-guided tour of artist studios for 2 days on the weekend before Thanksgiving. We've been running for 20 years in this community. And just to give you an idea of the size of this program, last year we had 22 locations, and we experienced a total of 2,500 visits on those 2 days, 2,500. Waldy Blacksmith Shop was the highest with 383 visitors. Now that's a lot of people driving around this region through North Halton, experiencing the countryside and the talents of our local artists. Directional signage not only announces the tour, but helps people navigate to the various locations. As chair of the studio tour, I attended the town's public session on road fouling bylaw and presented our concerns. Town staff was sympathetic, but offered really no solutions. Council addressed the issue in August and came up with a solution that allowed FASM to post signages for last year's tour, but requested further study by staff to establish a workable bylaw and amendment procedures. Course 1119 is staff's response, in which, in my opinion, offers no guidelines or solutions to the problem. Slide. Do I just push? Good, okay. I'm sorry, I didn't want that on quite yet. Sorry, Fred. Using affiliated groups as our guideline really offers no solution at all to, it presents a problem. Okay, now you can put it on, sorry. So this is an analysis of the affiliated groups that were listed on the town website versus the ones that were listed on the reports. And you can see these are some of the affiliated groups in our community, and these ones are all on there on both sites, so that's fine. Go to the next slide, please. So although the numbers in total look the same, these are the groups that are listed on the report that you were given, and then those that are on the website. So there's total confusion within the community as who's on an affiliated group, who isn't. And by the time you add it all together, we've got actually 20 groups that don't know which way they're on the list, one way or the other. So the number of affiliated groups, as per the town website, is 36. On the affiliation report is 37, but in actual fact, it's 46. And just over half of those are athletic organizations. So this could be an absolute bureaucratic nightmare for the town and create further confusion for the not-for-profit organizations. So I sat back and I looked at all of this and I thought there's got to be an easier way to address this thing of how do we let the groups that are running charitable or not-for-profit community organizations, how do we let them get their message out without causing exactly what has happened with the fines one way and another? And so I'm proposing a rather simple solution that hasn't been presented before. What I did is I thought about what are Milton's annual events that mark the passage of time throughout the year? The anniversaries, the special occasions. What are the annual celebrations that welcome our new residents to experience what makes Milton so special? Who organizes these events? And where do these events take place? Can members of our new communities actually find where these events are taking place? Slide, please. So I identified 11 major annual events that are organized by not-for-profit community groups for the enjoyment of all residents of Milton. They mark the passage of time throughout the year. If you go through this, it's done fairly chronologically. You'll see what happens as we travel through the year. They are celebrations of our culture that welcome residents, new and old, to experience what makes Milton special. Most of these require directional signage for those new to the Milton, and all of these are date sensitive and would benefit from just a week's notice. That's all we're asking, is a week's notice. So I think we can establish just these very simple guidelines on who should be able to put signs up for major events. The criteria would be it must be an annual event presented for the enjoyment of all residents, not-for-profit volunteer community groups, registered as an affiliated group, and this gives the town some control over who's doing what. As has already been established, signage on town road allowances for 1 week prior to the event. Signs must be removed within 48 hours of the end of the event. FASM dealt with this last year. It's not easy. We have to know where the regional roads are. We have to get the signs up and down. It was a lot of volunteer hours to make it work. But it did work, and we had a fabulous studio tour, which I don't think we would have had without those signs. And so as a control mechanism, I guess, participating events must register with the town, stating the event and the dates and the contact person. These 11 events could be posted on the town website. We could explain why we are posting those 11 events and allow groups to apply for them if they fit the criteria. And the criteria is very simple and straightforward. So there you go. I think it's a pretty easy resolution, actually. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one councillor at this point who wishes to ask you a question. Councillor Hamid, go ahead.
Not really a question, but I just wanted to thank you for the presentation. I hadn't seen it before, and I got to say, what you're proposing is much better than what we came up with, so maybe you want to run for council at some point.
Oh, no, I like this role.
Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just wondering, and I don't know exactly where this is going to go when council deals with it, but the question to Nancy is, and I think it's a good suggestion you made, and you heard me say that I don't have the silver bullet, but I think you got one there that's maybe going to work. Would you be prepared as one individual to sit down with staff and add your area of frustrations and some of your areas of expertise? Because this is really how it all started, through a lot of your frustrations a year ago, and I'm well aware. And I said at that point in time, if you'll recall, I think what we're doing will come back to haunt us, and guess what? It has. And so we got to correct it. So I guess, are you prepared to sit down? Then there might be another person or two from the community that might want to sit down with staff and really get it right this time, because it's just a mess right now.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, absolutely, and I think probably some of the other groups, like the parades and the Canada Day celebrations, somebody from that area of the appointed committees as well.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm not thinking about cast of hundreds or dozens. No. I'm thinking maybe 2 or 3 individuals from different groups, so they can have their input into it. Because I'm sure if that had to happen last time, we wouldn't be in this predicament today. Thank you.
Thanks, Your Worship. Any further questions of the delegation? Thank you. The next delegate is Tony Leone. Is Mr. Leone in the... there he is. That's fine. Tony, if you could identify who you are and where you live, that would be appreciated.
My name is Tony Leone. I'm from Italian Club in Milton. And I have Rosanna Conteduca, the Vice President, and I'm the President. Rosanna is going to talk because her English is much better than mine. So, Rosanna, thank you.
Thank you, Tony. First of all, Mr. Chair, councillors, Mayor, thank you for your time. And Nancy Cuddle, thank you for going ahead of us because you set the pace for us. That was a wonderful presentation. For those of you who are not aware of the Italian Canadian Club, we are a nonprofit organization with a location at 104 Tremaine here in Milton. Our board of directors consists of 16 volunteers. And the word volunteers is really important because everything that we do is really outside of our regular day jobs, and we really do the best that we can. We are here today because we are one of those organizations that did receive a fine for the lawn signs. Our apologies, first off, for not taking the time to look at the bylaw, understanding the bylaw, and following whatever rules we needed to follow. But basically, we do hold community events on-site and off-site in some cases, which are open to members, non-members, Italians, and non-Italians. Our main objective for every event is to give back a portion of our net proceeds to a charity. We have supported numerous charities over the years. Just in the year 2017-2018, we donated a total of $18,000 to the Milton District Hospital, $1,500 to the Halton Women's Place, $2,000 worth of food for kids, $1,300 to Pack a Bag, and most recently, from our Italia Fest proceeds, where we received this fine, $3,500 to Rock, supporting kids' mental health. Italia Fest 2018 was our first annual Italia Fest, which was a collaboration between the Italian Canadian Club and La Rose Bakery, another community partner who does a lot for this community. In the previous years, both La Rose and ourselves held our separate events. La Rose being the home for Italia Fest, as you may remember, in their parking lot. The Italian Canadian Club held annual picnics at our 104 Tremaine location. Neither one of us in previous years had ever used lawn signs. In fact, to be quite honest, in the time that I've been on this board, we never used lawn signs as marketing. We basically just relied on flyers, social media. But keeping one thing in mind, our founding members are elderly, and they are in the age group of, I would say, 65 plus, and they don't look at social media. We actually have to pick up the phone. We try to distribute flyers, but because this event was the first time we were getting together at a new location, we really wanted to make sure that the community would know where Italia Fest was, not to show up at La Rose's backyard or parking lot, but to make sure that they came to our location. Logistically, there was a lot to think about with this event, and we didn't realize the magnitude of the event, and we were actually quite surprised at the turnout. And we just, to be quite honest, didn't really even consider looking at the bylaws for the signs. Things came up that we hadn't anticipated, like getting an extension for our liquor license and dealing with the health department. These are things that just came up as we were going along and during a very stressful time for our board, because we were also undertaking a huge task of applying for 2 grants, which was the Ontario Trillium Grant and the Commuting Grant, which we didn't have experience in either. Well, I'm happy to say that we were awarded the Ontario Trillium Grant, and it was a result, to be quite honest, because of Italia Fest. Parm Gill came to our Italia Fest and saw what we could do for the community, and we were able to advocate the types of things that the Italian Canadian Club would like to do for the town of Milton. We would like our Italian Club to be more of a cultural center, And the grant is actually written around inspiring people in our community. And this is what we want to do. And honestly, this fine at this point would really have a negative impact to the Italian Canadian Club and future charities that we would like to support. So we do apologize for our negligence, but we ask if we can be forgiven for this one-time fine. I'm sorry. I'm sounding a bit desperate now.
Yes, I feel like Judge Judy here, but I'm not. But anyway, is that the end of your presentation? You've completed your presentation? Okay. Yes, if you could just identify again for the clerk name and address. We got Tony's, we didn't get yours.
Rosanna Contaduca, 45 Miles Street, Milton.
Okay. And I have His Worship and Councillor Hamid.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'll ask Rosanna the same question as I asked Nancy. Would you be prepared to work on that committee that she's already agreed to?
Another committee. Sure.
Because, Mr. Chairman, and I thank for that. So I think we can get another individual from the community out there, and I'll leave that up to staff or someone else. But seeing that these two individuals have stepped forward there with a concern, I think that they should be involved because you've been involved right from the start of it. So, and I appreciate that. So, thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Hamid.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you for the presentation and thank you for everything ICCM, Italian Canadian Club, does for the community. Through you, Mr. Chair, I wonder if Mayor Krantz would like to move the motion now for this specific delegate so we can deal with it before she goes.
Yeah, I've got the meeting, okay?
You got it. Thanks.
All right. There may be other people who wish to speak. Okay, and this is not going to be particularly simple because this is not one of the options that's in the report. So you're asking essentially for a deferral and back to staff to meet with the public to come forward with a recommendation to council. Is that correct?
That's part of it, Mr. Chairman, but I'm also mentioned there that I want and I don't care whether it's combined or maybe it's better to have it separated possibly because there's two that are asking, as Rosanna says, for forgiveness, and I refer to it as waiving that penalty that was not deserved by either one of them. So.
Okay, so the first motion that I'm hearing, Your Worship, is to waive the fine against the Italian Canadian Club of Milton.
Exactly.
For the illegal sign.
Yes.
Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Hamid. Any discussion? All those in favor, raise your hands. It carries. Your second, maybe I should let you relax. Thank you. The second motion, Your Worship, I'm assuming is, and I'll check with the clerk as well, I'm assuming what we're looking for here, Mr. Clerk, is a deferral back to staff and further discussions with those people identified who wish to provide staff with their input, and then it would come back to council as a form of a report and a recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, there was one other there that I was going to suggest, and I'm at your mercy of when you want to deal with it, but the waiving of it, and it's under the signature of Dr. Rabia Azim, and it's for the Ella Health and Education Foundation. There's a letter attached to our agenda where they got fined as well because of that. So again, I'm prepared to move that be waived as well.
Okay, Your Worship, does the clerk have that? I don't have the name of the organization. I don't have the letter in front of me, but I'm assuming that
it's in our bundle.
Yeah, I'm assuming that it's boilerplate. Just change the name.
Yeah.
Okay. Do I have a seconder? Sorry, Glenn.
Thank you. Just sorry, a point of clarification. The accounts receivable we have is not under the name that's in the letter, so I just wanted to make sure that we're directing it to the right account. It is under Min-Max Realty is the account on record.
Okay, so Min-Max was actually fined, not the organization that they're associated with.
Sorry, I have a point of order.
Just a second.
Correct. The notes in the record I have is under that name.
Okay.
Chairman, I'm just going by the letter that was sent to me, and of course, whenever I get anything like that, council sees it as well. There with the violation and asking it to be waived.
Your Worship, Glenn raises a valid point. You know, it's one thing for a letter to come in on Min-Max stationery, but who was actually fined?
Well,
So, yeah, I just want to get staff first.
Yes, Chairman.
Sorry, through the chair, the fine and that we have is with Min-Max Realty.
Okay,
Councillor?
Mr. Chairman, the letter that I have and you should have is not on Min-Max, even though it's signed, as I understand, by one of the principals.
It's staff's understanding that it was Min-Max.
Okay.
Councillor
Sorry,
DiLorenzo.
nowhere in the documentation that I've received mentioned Min-Max, but I have a conflict of interest with Min-Max, so I need to do, so this is being brought up right now, and it was never mentioned in any of these documents.
Okay.
But if we're talking about Min-Max, I want to declare a conflict of interest right now.
Okay, thank
and I'll
you.
sign a document. And the conflict of interest is in I've received advertising dollars from Min-Max in the past. That's my conflict of interest if we're discussing that.
I appreciate you raising that.
And that's fair enough, yeah.
Okay. Glenn?
And other just point of clarity, in reading the letter, it does speak, and as noted, is from the foundation, and they're speaking more towards the booking of the velodrome in here, and actually specifically notes keeping the other matter of the collection separate from their discussion on the booking. So that might help provide some context as to why it's the foundation in the letter versus the separate issue of the collection of the fine.
It's my understanding, Mr. Chairman, I stand corrected, it was because of illegal signs that was put up for their event, their fundraiser event for the community. I stand corrected on that, but yeah. But anyway, that's the motion. If there's no seconder, that's it, so.
Well, I haven't asked for a seconder, Your Worship, to be fair to you. But you still wish to bring the motion forward?
Definitely, yes.
Okay, is there a seconder? Councillor? All right. You've seconded it, and so now I'll take your question, Councillor. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, now that I'm reading the letter and given the point that Glenn brought up, it is really kind of ambiguous. First of all, what the signs were advertising. Were they advertising the event, or were they advertising the account holder of who's receiving the fines?
Yes, Mary Beth, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, maybe I can provide some clarity. So the event was the Multicultural Festival, but it actually had the corporate logo of Min-Max on it, which is why they were invoiced.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies.
Do you have any further questions or comments you want to make? Okay, Councillor Hamid.
Question answered. Thank you.
Any further questions on the motion? All in favor, raise your hand. Okay, the motion loses. So there is a final motion of deferral back to staff. You're moving that, Your Worship?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, yes.
The clerk has the motion. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Cluett. Any discussions, Councillor Melbourne?
Yeah, I was supporting the deferral because I think Nancy made some good points, and I liked with her recommendation, and I think staff should take a serious look at that. And, you know, the Italian Club made their argument as well, so I'll be supporting the deferral, and, you know, I think staff heard what was being proposed, and hopefully they'll take that into consideration.
Any further questions or comments on the motion? All in favor, raise your hands. It carries. Next on the agenda is staff report PD 007-19, technical report, proposed zoning bylaw related to Orlando Corporation for lands located within the Dairy Green Corporate Business Park secondary plan on the east side of James Snow Parkway. Is there a representative from staff who wishes to provide the highlights of this report?
Good evening. Thank you, Chair, Mayor Krantz, and members of Council. Further to our statutory public meeting on January 21st, we're before you this evening with a recommendation for approval of the zoning bylaw amendment by Orlando Corporation. They are seeking to add an additional site-specific provision relating to an increase in height for a warehouse and distribution center. The increase in height is necessary for a potential e-commerce tenant to install a state-of-the-art automation system, which includes an automated elevating device used in conjunction with a racking system for storage and efficient product distribution. Through the review of the application, it was also identified that the 28-meter height is proposed to be measured from the finished floor elevation to the top of the flat roof, which is contrary to the town's definition of building height, which we measure from average grade. During the site plan review process, detailed grading information will be provided and reviewed to establish the average finished grade. However, out of an abundance of caution, staff are of the opinion that amending the definition of height to be measured from the finished floor elevation to the top of the flat roof will allow flexibility in grading and engineering plans, but will also ensure that the resulting massing of the building will be as is currently proposed. Draft plan approval and zoning were received in March 2017 to permit an industrial plan of subdivision. The provisions associated with this application are proposed in addition to those granted in 2017, and no additional provisions are proposed. Of note, the holding provision relating to an enhanced level of berming, landscaping, and urban design along James Snow Parkway remain. A shadow impact study was submitted with the application and demonstrates that the shadow impact of the development between April 21st and September 21st complies with the requirements of the shadow impact analysis guidelines, such that the public sidewalks will receive at least 5 hours of consecutive sunlight per day, and building and roof areas of adjacent buildings will not be impacted for more than 2 consecutive hours on December 21st. It is further noted that there is no anticipated shadow impact to residential dwellings west of the proposed building. An updated traffic memorandum was received and reviewed by engineering staff, to which they have no concerns from a site-generated traffic perspective. As it was stated in the memorandum, the total site traffic generated in peak hours is actually less than the previous total forecast for full development of the site, with truck volumes maintained at the same level as previously forecast. Traffic staff also highlighted that the consultant did not use the most recent edition of the ITE trip generation manual, which would have resulted in even lower traffic forecasts than what is noted. So the analysis that was provided is a conservative estimate. So to conclude, staff are of the opinion that the proposed zoning bylaw amendment meets the intent of our local planning policy direction and achieves acceptable engineering and design standards. Based on the foregoing, staff recommend that the zoning bylaw amendment be approved, and we do have a consultant for the applicant here with us this evening as well. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions of council with respect to this application? Councillor Tesser-Dirksen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is with respect to the type of precedent this would set for other potential requests for increases, like significant increases in the height of buildings.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, every application is considered based on its own merits and does not set a precedent per se. We would always start from the numbers that are in the official plan, secondary plan, and zoning bylaw as a starting point, and the framework that we would consider changes against.
Thank you.
Any other questions of the delegation? Seeing none, thank you very much. I have the resolution signed and seconded. I'll read it, and then I'll take any final comments from council, and we'll vote on it. Be it resolved that Planning and Development Report PD 007-19, outlining an application for amendment to the Town of Milton zoning bylaw 016-2014 as amended to facilitate the construction of a 28-meter high building be approved, and that staff be authorized to bring forward an amending zoning bylaw in accordance with the draft bylaw attached as Appendix 1 to Report PD 007-19 for council adoption, and that pursuant to subsequent 3417 of the Planning Act, Council has determined that the change to the definition of building height in the proposed bylaw introduced after the holding of the public meeting does not require further public notice. and that whereas the Planning Act limits the ability to apply for a minor variation for a 2-year period following approval of this bylaw, be it resolved that a privately initiated application for a minor variance may be made. That's the resolution. I have it moved and seconded. Any further questions, Your Worship?
Mr. Chairman, I'm in support of the motion there, but I think some information that Council should be aware of, and I just got this today. I know the whole world doesn't evolve around the almighty dollar, but believe it or not, a lot of it does. You know, on the assumption that this passes, development charges for the region is over $13 million that the region will get. Town's portion will be in excess of $3.5 million. These are development charges. School board will get $1.8 million. These are one-time development charges. But more importantly, let's just assume that this passes. The town's portion every year, and this is just this year for 2019, it'll be approximately $600,000. That's every year, every year. Believe it or not, the region's portion will be a little in excess of $700,000 every year. School board every year would be $1.1 million. So just think about, you know, if this doesn't pass, how much we're not going to get. Bottom line. Thank you.
Thanks, Your Worship. Councillor Malboof.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll also be supporting the recommendation, not only for the reasons the mayor explained, which makes enough sense as it is, but I remember when this first came forward, I believe, Mr. Chair, you asked a question as to why was it necessary for this development to raise the height, and at that time we didn't have an answer. Glad to see in the report it specifies the reason behind it, so that question has been answered, and when we're looking at 1,000 jobs as well as all the revenues, it's not something to turn our back on. So I'm happy to support the recommendation.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Di Lorenzo.
I had some comments as well, just because in the last council meeting this came to us. I had questions about the traffic and number of trucks, and I'm happy to hear that actually the estimate is conservative, and it's actually under the number of trucks that actually the site was originally planned to support. And I also had questions about the height, and the person at the time says, you know, they couldn't tell us. And I had questions about the use of the building, and they said, you know, they couldn't tell us. So I like now the report actually says, you know, why they need the height. And it actually mentions in the report now, it says it's for e-commerce tenants. So even though it doesn't say exactly who it is, but it gives us more information, a little bit more information of the purpose of the location. And I had questions about the shadowing, but it mentions here it's not going to impact the residential homes to the west. So those are my 3 main concerns, and they have been addressed in this technical report. So I'm in support of the motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Apparently there are some issues with Amazon possibly not going to New York, so who knows? You know, maybe they're coming to Milton. I also want to take this point to apologize to you. You raised a point of order. I did not recognize it, and I should have. And next time, I will. So my apologies.
It's the first time I've ever said point of order at a council meeting.
It's the first time I've ever had to entertain one. Isn't that a coincidence? Anyway, anything further? All those in favor of the motion, raise your arms. Carried. The next item of business right. Okay. Yeah, there's a regional council update first of all, and then there has been a request by a member of council with respect to the confidential session, and we will be required to go in camera for a matter. And I was going to move that to after the bylaws are read, so it would be the last item, and then we would adjourn. If those who have attended council wish to update council on matters before the region, let's do that first, and then I'll entertain the next item. Nobody has anything to talk
Mr.
about.
Chairman, I have nothing to report, so.
We have nothing to report. Regional Council hasn't met. We meet on Wednesday.
Okay. All right. There is a notice of motion that I have before me, and it has been moved by Councillor Ali and seconded by Councillor Hamid. And you decide amongst yourselves who wishes to raise the matter with Council.
Thank you, Chair. This is an issue that has come to Council before, and it is an area, there's a park, Sunny Mount Park, where there's a proposed medical office building, and I'm not going to take this opportunity to play any blame game or say it was right or wrong. What I do know is that despite everything that has happened, the residents of that area remain concerned about the integrity of the green space, about the integrity of the Heritage House, about the safety of their children, the traffic, and the safety in general. And for that reason, I would like my colleagues' support in looking for a feasible option to look into the feasibility of buying the property back, because I believe that this is what the residents want, and it is a residential area, there are schools nearby, and I feel like that is the right thing to do.
Councillor Hamid and then Councillor Di Lorenzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the interest of time, I'll keep it really short. I think the council did a disservice to the residents by selling the property and losing control of it. So I think this is one opportunity to correct the mistake. As we continue to negotiate with developer, as we should, to see if we can find something better, and as we continue to find in front of LPAT, which I think we should continue to do as well. So I think it's a third venue, so we can research all three in parallel to come up with a conclusion that works best for the residents in the area as well as municipality. So as I said, I'll keep it short, and I'd be asking for a recorded vote, please.
Councillor Di Lorenzo.
I'm very much in favor of this a notice of motion. Being the previous councillor for the area, I agree with what Councillor Mead said, as being was a disservice to the community that we lost control of the property. I had one question though. It mentions report back to council in the next property management strategy report. When is the next property management strategy report?
Andrew?
Through you, Mr. Chair, probably within the next 3 months, I would expect.
3 months. Is it possible if we get an answer before then, could town staff send a memo to council what that information is? Just if we have an earlier answer, why wait 3 months?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, absolutely.
Thank you very much. That's it.
Councillor Malbouf and then Mayor Krantz.
Yeah, I'll support the motion iffy-wise because it's basically just to have staff take a look at it. My concern is to be discussing land purchases in open council in the public is not a wise thing to do. So, but it's on the table now, so let's see what the staff comes back with, but I have concerns with what we're doing.
Your Worship.
Chairman, I echo Councillor Melbouf's sentiments there. I'll support it as well there, but a notice of motion, and the acting clerk can correct me, I usually thought that there was no discussion on it whatsoever in a recorded vote. I have no problem standing up and being accounted, in support of having a look at it there, but there's always that willing buyer, willing seller, and all those nice things. Just let's assume for a moment that the people that own it today are not interested at all, regardless of the money. Are we going to expropriate? Think about it, I just don't want us to get silly about it. That's what, I'm trying to drive at. So have a look at it, and whatever staff come back with, we'll deal with it. So thank you.
Councillor Di Lorenzo.
I didn't think expropriation was an option.
Councillor Cluett, he is entitled to make an observation. But I have a question that His Worship raised, and that relates to, are we conducting the notice of motion correctly in terms of allowing people to ask questions and offer comments?
Your Worship, Mr. Chairman, it's called a notice of motion. It's a motion because it's a referral to staff for a report back, so it's actually considered at tonight's meeting. it was a real notice of motion to do something, it would be presented tonight and then voted on at the March 4th meeting.
All right, well, the mover, or sorry, not the mover, but one of our fellow councillors has asked for a recorded vote, and no?
I stand corrected. There's no vote. This is what I heard. The vote will be the next meeting. I'm confused as well because
the vote is tonight.
The vote is tonight.
Chairman.
Do you still wish a recorded motion? Recorded vote, sorry.
If I'm entitled to, then yes. If not, then no.
You're entitled?
Then yes, please.
Okay. Mr. Clerk? I'm going to read the motion and then, sorry.
For clarification, this is just to receive this report. We're not making any commitment other than to have staff take a look at it.
Yeah, that's correct. Okay, so I'll read the motion and then the clerk will manage the recorded component of it. It's moved by Councillor Ali, as I indicated, seconded by Councillor Hamid. Be it resolved, whereas the town of Milton over the years has been involved in the acquisition and sale of property through consideration of reports from executive services on property management strategy, and whereas the residents around the Sunnymount Park wish to understand the feasibility of reacquiring for town purposes the former rural property located at 155 Rural Drive, therefore be it resolved that staff report back to council in the next property management strategy report the cost and feasibility of reacquiring the former rural property at 155 Rural Drive. Mr. Clerk.
Councillor Mead has requested a recorded vote, Mr. Chairman. So I'll ask all those in favor of the motion, please stand. Councillor Cluett, Councillor Ali, Mayor Krantz, Councillor Di Lorenzo, Councillor Cluett, or Councillor Malbouf, Councillor Tesser-Dirkser, my mistake, Councillor Tesser-Dirkser, Councillor Mead, Councillor Challoner.
The motion carries. Okay, so we're going to do the bylaws now, and then we'll go in camera. Now, Your Worship, this is a change from the last time I was around. You used to have to read it 3 times. Now you have to read it once. Excellent. Moved by Councillor Cluett, seconded by Councillor Ali. Be it resolved that bylaw numbers 006-2019, 007-2019, 008-2019, 009-2019, 010-2019, 011-2019, 012-2019, 013-2019, 014-2019, 015-2019, 016-2019, and 017-2019, as amended, be read, passed, and numbered, and that the mayor and the town clerk be authorized to sign the said bylaws, seal them with the seal of the corporation, and that they be engrossed in the bylaw book. Any questions or comments to this motion?
Mr. Chairman, just because we are dealing with the bylaws before the end of the meeting, the February 11th meeting will not be included. It'll go on the March 4th meeting.
Okay. Any questions? All those in favor, raise your hands. It's carried. Moved by Councillor Cluett, seconded by Councillor Ali, be it resolved that council convene into confidential session to discuss personnel matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, with respect to citizen appointments to various boards and committees. Any questions or comments? All in favor, raise your arms. Thank you. We'll just recess for a couple of minutes, allow people to clear the area, and then we'll go into session.